Chapter 1906. Evil Dragon? In the Paranormal Research Department's office, Asashel looked at Noah, who was sitting opposite him, in shock. The mass of calamity actually revived that thing? The battle between Noah and Glendale had alarmed the demons, angels, and fallen angels who stayed behind in Colt King Town. It was only after Euclid and Glendale had left that the Jumanli's kin rushed over. After that, Noah contacted Asashel and had him come here to tell him about the situation. Therefore, apart from Asashel, the Jumanli's kin were also present. Evil Dragon. Lyeth said as if she had a headache. I didn't expect that a legendary dragon would appear in my territory. This is really unsettling. Glendale, the evil dragon that was destroyed by the famous Norse hero Beowulf. Zhu Nai's expression became troubled. If we were to face an enemy of that level, I'm afraid we'd be in trouble. In the past, when Glendale was still alive, many heroes were killed by that evil dragon. It was only when Lord Beowulf intervened that the dragon was annihilated, Losvias said. That's a famous dragon that was recorded in the ancient books of Norse. It was said that it was completely destroyed, and logically speaking, there shouldn't be any possibility of it being revived. It's because it can do that it's scary, Yudu said solemnly. If the mass of calamity can revive a target that was completely destroyed, perhaps the other evil dragons have been revived as well. I heard that among the evil dragons, the most powerful and famous ones are the Celtic clan Kuvok, the Persian Az Dahaka, and the Hindu Apophis. Rebel's face was filled with unease. Don't tell me that even those evil dragons have been revived. I can't refute that. Kitten lowered her head with a rare solemn expression. But I didn't sense the presence of any other evil dragon other than Glendale. The Jumanli's kin were able to find Noah immediately because Kitten had sensed the evil dragon's presence. However, Euclid seemed to have made preparations beforehand and set up a barrier around Glendale to prevent the transfer spell from being activated. That was why Kitten could not immediately summon the Jumanli's kin to the scene even though she had sensed the evil dragon's presence in advance. She only arrived after Euclid and Glendale had left. Are there still that many dangerous dragons? They're all dragons that even those who haven't read the Bible are familiar with. Although there are no other mythical dragons in the Bible. Isha, Genova, and Irina hid in a corner and whispered to each other. Their expressions were not as solemn as the others. Only Gasper, who had always been timid, had a look of fear on his face. He was just short of running away. All right, you don't have to worry so much, Noah said comfortingly. The resurrection of the evil dragon is no doubt bad news. But even if the sky falls, we'll be here to hold it up. You guys are still young, and it's too early to think about fighting against a Dragon King level evil dragon and a legendary level demonic dragon. What? Riaz said rather awkwardly. Undoubtedly, Master is only a few years older than us. You guys are just looking for trouble if you compare yourself to him. Athasher smiled bitterly. Among all the mythical influences in the world, those with high authority have lived for at least tens of thousands of years. Even your elder brother, who is a demon lord, is merely a kid who has lived for several thousand years in their eyes. In the end, even those Azura gods and Buddhas are extremely fearful of your teacher. Compared to him, you're just asking for trouble. He is the only exception in the world. However, Noah is right. You guys are just young people who haven't even graduated from high school. You guys belong to the new generation in the demon realm. Although each of you is very outstanding, it's still too early to think about fighting against a Dragon King level existence. Athasher waved his hand. Every Dragon King level existence is at least comparable to a Demon King. Even I don't have the confidence to win against them. You guys who have participated in the battle against the evil god Loki should know how dangerous it is. If you meet them, you must not fight them. Do you understand? The Gemengli subordinates looked at each other in dismay before nodding helplessly. Noah and Athasher's expressions relaxed a little. Compared to the evil dragon, I'm actually more concerned about something else. Athasher stroked his chin. That Euclid guy told you to see you in the territory of the vampires, right? What does that mean? I'm not sure. Noah knocked on the table and narrowed his eyes. However, it has to be the vampires. I have a bad feeling about this. The vampires were a very ancient race, and had a class system very similar to that of the demons. They were existences that could only live in the darkness, and they valued bloodline and status very much. Just like how there were pure-blooded demon families among the demons, the vampires were also led by nobles. Although the vampires' territory also had a modern lifestyle because they had absorbed many new vampires from the modern era, the nobles with noble bloodlines seemed to have maintained a medieval lifestyle. This was very similar to the demons. The demons had also absorbed many reincarnated demons, and their lifestyle had greatly improved. They had modern high-rise buildings and medieval castles. It was very incredible. The difference was that the demons lived in the underworld, while the vampires lived in a corner of the human world. However, this race had always maintained a certain distance from the other forces. The vampires valued bloodline more than any other race. This race that lived by blood was also more xenophobic than any other force. They were extremely repulsed to come into contact with other non-human beings, and lived according to their own values. They had no intention of coming into contact with other forces at all. To put it nicely, they were conservative. To put it bluntly, they were too arrogant and did not care about the existence of other races. Therefore, even if all the mythical forces in the world had reached an agreement and cooperated with each other, the vampires were still stubbornly sticking to their views, and had no intention of coming into contact with other forces. Perhaps the vampires have their own reasons for this? Athaziel sighed. After all, the vampires have always been in internal strife since hundreds of years ago. It was said that hundreds of years ago, the vampires had a huge rupture. From then on, the vampires were divided into two factions. One was the male Tsepeshi faction. The other was the female Camilla faction. These two factions had always been in conflict since hundreds of years ago, and until now, there had been no conclusion. Could it be that the vampires are already in cahoots with the disaster squad? Laybell raised her hand. The vampires have always been stubbornly sticking to their own views and not coming into contact with us. Is it possible that they have already joined forces with the disaster squad? The one who answered this question was none other than Gasper. I don't think that's possible, Gasper mustered up his courage and said. The vampires value bloodline very much, and even mixed bloods will be looked down upon by them. The disaster squad has humans, demons, fallen angels, and all kinds of other races. With the vampires' values, it's impossible to come into contact with them. These words, coming from Gasper, who was both a vampire and a mixed blood, was undoubtedly very convincing. I don't think the vampires have joined forces with the disaster squad either, Leah said. If that's the case, the vampires will try to come into contact with us. If they can get on this side, it will undoubtedly be more beneficial for the disaster squad, right? That would be the so-called traitor. Noah had also considered these questions. It's just that I have a feeling that things are not as simple as we think. Noah shook his head. No matter what, Athaziel, I think we need to go to the vampires' territory in advance. Asashel nodded his head heavily. At this time, a communication magic circle opened up beside Athaziel's ear. After a while, Athaziel stood up in surprise. The vampires plan to talk to us? Athaziel's words stunned everyone, including Noah. Chapter 1907. The next day, as usual, Noah lived his life as a teacher in the Colt King Academy. After school, he brought the Jimmins into the training space for special training as usual. He only brought Orpheus back to the apartment after dark. When it was late at night, Noah asked Aster and Athena to accompany Orpheus while he went out and returned to the school. He went to the Supernatural Research Department's office. Every member of the Jumanli family was present. Asashel was also present. Except for Laius and Asashel, who were sitting on the sofa in the office, everyone else stood behind the sofa. The atmosphere in the air was somewhat heavy. The people present did not talk as unbridled as before. Instead, it was as if they deliberately lowered their voices and whispered to each other. Even Laius and Asashel were affected by the atmosphere and did not speak. They just sat there with their eyes closed, as if waiting for something. In such an atmosphere, Noah's arrival seemed to have broken the silence and attracted everyone's attention. No one spoke. However, Noah's arrival clearly eased everyone's expression a little. Okay. Asashel finally spoke. Since even the God Slayer is here, no matter what the vampire's purpose is, they won't be able to cause any trouble in front of this guy, right? Yesterday, the vampires, who had been showing a clear refusal to the other forces, suddenly contacted the demons, angels, and fallen angels, indicating that they wanted to have a meeting. Moreover, the target was not any of the leaders of the demons, angels, and fallen angels, but Laius. This matter caused great confusion and doubt to the demons, angels, and fallen angels, and it also shocked the Jimmons. Although Laius was the next leader of the Jimmons were at best just one of the pure-blooded demon families in the demon realm. Their status was not high enough to represent the demon realm to talk to the other forces. Under such circumstances, it was really inconceivable that the vampires, who had been refusing contact before, suddenly wanted to have a meeting with Laius. Moreover, the vampires did not seem to be targeting the Jimmons, but Laius herself. Therefore, there was no doubt that this meeting definitely contained information that others were unaware of. In this regard, the demons, angels, and fallen angels even held a meeting and finally decided to accept the talks with the vampires. Still, it was worrying to have only Leah's and the Zamanli's kin talk to the vampires. Thus, Asashel volunteered to participate in this discussion as the guardian representative of the Zamanli family. Noah, on the other hand, was a witness to the negotiations. Naturally, he had a legitimate reason to stay. As for the time of the meeting, the vampires expressed that the sooner the better, and directly set it for the next night. The location was none other than the Supernatural Research Society of the Full King Academy. Listen up, little ones. Noah's eyes fell on the Zamanli's kin who were standing behind Laius as he instructed them. Later on, no matter what the other party says, none of you are allowed to interrupt, in case the other party makes use of you or has something that can be used against you. Do you understand? The group of Jimenez nodded in agreement. Only Gasper had a complicated expression on his face. Vampires were a race that placed great emphasis on bloodlines and viewed humans as prey and bait. For vampires who valued bloodlines, mixed bloods were naturally the most lowly existences. One could only imagine what kind of treatment Gasper had suffered in the past. Leas had secretly told Noah that Gasper had escaped from the vampire's territory and was unfortunately discovered by the church's exorcist, who almost killed him. Leas, who had discovered Gasper, used a demonic pawn when Gasper was on the verge of death and reincarnated him into a demon, making him one of her own kin. This timid and slender young man had lived quite a hard life in the past. And all of this was thanks to the vampires. That was why Gasper was so resistant to going to the vampire's territory. Now, under unexpected circumstances, he had to meet the person in charge of the vampires face to face. It was not hard to imagine how Gasper's mood was. To be honest, it was not an exaggeration to say that the vampire's values were the worst in the eyes of humans and kind-hearted people. Noah also did not have any good feelings about this race. However, Noah would not point fingers at other people's lifestyles. That was just putting his values into other people's values. Therefore, Noah only said this to Gasper. If you want to leave, it's not too late. That one sentence made everyone look at Gasper. Gasper, Leas said gently. Don't force yourself, it's okay. It's okay. Gasper shook his head and mustered his courage. Compared to hiding in the room alone, I'd rather be with everyone, even if we're facing vampires. This wasn't unreasonable. Then you can watch from the side. Noah nodded. Maybe the other party will choose to meet with Leas, and it might have something to do with you. After leaving such a seemingly persuasive sentence, Noah sat down beside Leas. After all, the other party asked to talk to Leas. Therefore, Noah and Asashel both sat beside Leas as people related to her. Until a certain moment, a strange feeling began to spread throughout the entire space, and everyone's spirits were lifted. Here it comes. Leah subconsciously wanted to stand up. However, Noah and Asashel pressed Leah's shoulder at the same time. Don't overreact. Asashel patted Leah's shoulder. It's just the beginning. You're the main person of the meeting, there's no reason for you to stand up and greet him. Noah pursed his lips and turned his gaze to Yudu. Yudu, go and greet the guest. Understood. Yudu nodded and immediately walked out of the office. The atmosphere in the office became even more tense. Not long after, there was a knock on the door. Yudu opened the door with impeccable etiquette and allowed the guest to slowly walk in from outside. Everyone's eyes were immediately attracted to the guest. It was because the person who came in was too eye-catching. It was a young girl wearing a medieval princess dress. The girl had a delicate face and wavy blonde hair. Her figure was petite, and her eyes were as red as blood. She looked like a delicate puppet, giving off an unusual sense of beauty. Rather than saying that his skin was white, it would be more accurate to say that it was pale. She looked to be about 16 or 17 years old, about the same age as the Jimenez's family. Behind the girl, there was a man and a woman. The man and woman seemed to be just followers, but their skin was also terrifyingly pale, just like the dead, and their bodies were fluctuating with an indescribable sense of coldness. They were pure-blooded vampires. Compared to Gasper, who felt human, they seemed to be a race that did not fit in with humans. The leading vampire girl took a step forward, lifted the hem of her dress, and bowed like a noble. I'm Elmaine Shelton Gerstein, you can call me Elmaine. The vampire girl's voice was very pleasing to the ears, and her tone was quite polite, but it made everyone present feel a sense of superiority. That kind of feeling, although not to the extent of causing disgust, made people subconsciously think that the visitor was not friendly. Gerstein? Asashel stroked his chin. I remember, he seems to be the highest noble in the Camilla faction, one of the two major vampire clans, right? In other words, he was the noblest pure-blooded descendant of the vampires, other than the Opesh and Camilla factions. Leah nodded and turned her gaze to Elmaine. Although there are many things I want to ask, before that, please have a seat. Elmaine nodded and sat down opposite Leah's. Chapter 1908. Before we start the meeting, there is one thing I want to ask first. It's related to whether the next topic can be carried out smoothly. As soon as he sat down, Elmaine Scherzding immediately spoke. Moreover, as soon as he opened his mouth, everyone was taken aback. Someone among us vampires has become the host of the Divine Annihilation Tool. Do you already know this news? What? Asa Schurz was the first to react and almost stood up in surprise. A vampire has become the host of the Divine Annihilation Tool? It seems that you haven't received the news yet. Elmaine Scherzding seemed to have confirmed this matter and said to himself. However, that's not surprising. Recently, you have been focusing on the peace talks between the major forces and haven't received any information from us. Hearing that, Asa Schurz put away his shocked expression and faintly showed some regret. Indeed, recently, Asa Schurz has been busy with the peace talks between the major forces and relaxed a lot about the vampires. Asa Schurz was prepared to go to the vampires' territory again after the event. He didn't expect that with this relaxation, he didn't even get such important information. If it was Noah, he would also feel very annoyed, right? However, after a while, Asa Schurz took a deep breath and calmly spoke. Did the vampire get the Sephiroth's cup or the Tell Us Karma? There were a total of 13 types of divine annihilation tools. According to the ranking, the 13 types of divine annihilation tools, from high to low, were True Longinus, Brilliant Thunder Prison, Zenith Tempest, Annihilation Maker, Dimension Lost, Sephiroth's Cup, Red Dragon Emperor's Boosted Gear, White Dragon Emperor's Light Wings, Divine Dividing, Lion King's Battle Axe, Regulus Nemia, Innovation Clear, Eternal Ice Maiden, Absolute Damage, Incinerate Anthem of the Purple Flame Sacrificial Lord, Black Blade's Dog God, Canis Lycaon, Tell Us Karma. At this time, when all the major powers had reached an agreement, the whereabouts of 10 types of god extermination tools had been confirmed. The demons had the Lion King's axe, Regulus Nemia. The angels had the Brilliant Thunder Prison, Zenith Tempest. The fallen angels had the Black Blade Canis Lycaean. On the human side, there was a magic association that had the absolute damage. The captured heroes had True Longinus, Annihilation Maker, and Dimension Lost. In a group of magicians that kept a distance from the 3 major forces of demons, angels, and fallen angels and was regarded as dangerous and lawless by many magicians, there was the Incinerate Anthem of the Purple Flame Ritual Master. As for the Red Dragon Emperor's boosted gear and White Dragon Emperor's light wings, Divine Dividing, these 2 god extermination tools were in the hands of Noah and Wally, respectively. As for the remaining Sephiroth's Cup, Innovate Clear, and Tell Us Karma, their whereabouts were still unknown. Their whereabouts had yet to be confirmed. It was said that the current demon king Beelzebub, a Chuka, who was also a surpasser like Sazax, seemed to have obtained the innovation clear and was researching it. However, whether this news was true or false had not been confirmed. As for the Sephiroth's Cup and the Tell Us Karma, there wasn't even the slightest bit of information about them. If the vampires had a God's End relic, then it could only be one of the Sephiroth's Cup and the Tell Us Karma. Thus, Elmine Shelton also answered. The god extermination tool in the possession of the vampires is Sephiroth's Cup. Sephiroth's Cup. Just as the True Longinus referred to the famous Lance of Longinus, the Sephiroth's Cup referred to the famous Holy Grail. Really? Asashel couldn't help but mutter. The legendary holy relic actually fell into the hands of the vampires? We also think that this is a joke. After all, we have always been enemies with the church, Elmine Shelton said self-deprecatingly. As vampires, they actually went after the church's holy relic. This is the biggest joke. It wasn't just Elmine Shelton. Even Aisha, Genova, and Irina, the 3 former members of the church, had a complicated expression. In response, Asashel only said this. Since the vampires didn't give up on this holy relic and still keep it, then it proves that you want to use its power, right? Please don't joke around, okay? Elmine Shelton said with some disgust as if he was insulted. The Camilla faction is a noble clan of vampires. They would never pursue that kind of holy relic. It's not the Camilla faction that keeps the Sephiroth's Cup, but the Zepesh faction. The Zepesh faction? Everyone looked at each other. Lyeth couldn't help but speak up. Since it's the Zepesh faction that owns the Sephiroth's Cup, as members of the Camilla faction, why are you here? Our purpose is simple. Elmine Shelton looked up and turned to Gasper, who was behind Lyeth. In order to resist the power of the Zepesh faction that has obtained the divine relic, we, the Camilla faction, need a countermeasure, and that is Gasper Virati. Huh? Gasper was stunned on the spot. The Jamonli's kin were also shocked. In other words, Asashel asked with an uncertain tone. You want to use Gasper's power to deal with the Zepesh faction? That's right. Elmine Shelton nodded. That's the purpose of our trip. No way. Lyeth rejected without even thinking about it. Gasper's divine relic is powerful, but it can't compare to the divine relic. You're sending Gasper to his death. However, Lyeth's words made Elmine Shelton frown deeply. What's wrong? Elmine Shelton couldn't help but blurt out. Don't you know the true power hidden in that mixed blood's body? The true power hidden in Gasper's body? Everyone was stunned. On the side, Noah's eyes flickered slightly. Chapter 1909. Everyone could understand Elmine Shelton's thoughts. The so-called God's extermination tool was just like its literal meaning. It was a tool that could exterminate even gods. Although having a divine annihilation tool did not mean that one could kill a god, at least, with a divine annihilation tool, there was a slight possibility of killing a god. It was the same even if the user was a human. Chow Chow was the best example. The hero's descendant was very capable, and his comprehensive strength had even reached a 4-digit level. Even Noah had to use the divine annihilation tool before he gained a few gains over the past month and improved his strength greatly. Wally even forced Tyrannosaurus out. However, without the holy spear, no matter how capable Chow Chow was, he would be at the bottom of the 5-digit level at best, or even less than that. It was because of the holy spear that Chow Chow became the strongest human in this world, leading all the heroes' descendants and heroes' descendants. His strength and means were not weak. Of course, to be able to fully unleash the power of the holy spear and even develop 7 different subtypes of divine annihilation tool, it was clear that Chow Chow himself also had extraordinary abilities. However, it was because of this that the power of the strongest divine annihilation tool was fully revealed, making people more aware of how unfair the divine annihilation tool was. The vampires began to have internal strife hundreds of years ago and had been in a stalemate. The two factions, Kapesh and Camilla, had never been able to determine a winner. Even if there was a difference in strength between them, there was definitely not much difference. However, the appearance of the divine annihilation tool could completely destroy this balance. With the power of the divine annihilation tool, the Kapesh faction could definitely defeat the Camilla faction and gain true control of the vampires' world. Understanding this, the Camilla faction naturally had to think of ways to deal with the divine annihilation tool that destroyed the balance. That was why the Camilla faction took the initiative to propose a meeting. The reason why the target of the meeting was Lyath was also very simple. It was because they wanted to use the power of Lyath's kin, Gasper, who was once persecuted by the vampires, to deal with the Holy Grail. However, just like what Lyath said, although Gasper's divine artifact was very powerful, it was not to the point where it could rival the divine annihilation tool. Not to mention, the Holy Grail was ranked 5th among the gods' destruction artifacts. It was only below the top 4 gods' destruction artifacts. The Camilla faction was naturally aware of this. But Elmain Shelton still came for Gasper. The reason was because there was some kind of power hidden in Gasper's body. Not to mention the others, even Gasper himself didn't know about this matter. Because Gasper had long since been in a state of panic. My body, has a hidden power? Gasper was at a loss. That kind of thing, how is that possible? Everyone, including Leas who was Gasper's master, was at a loss. Seeing this, Elmain Shelton's crimson eyes flashed, and there was some pity in his eyes when he looked at Lias. So that's how it is. You don't know the truth about Gasper Verdi? If you knew, you wouldn't have accepted such a servant, right? What do you mean by that? Lias was getting a little angry. No matter what kind of power is hidden in Gasper's body, he is still my kin. I will never look down on him because of the so-called truth. Is that so? Elmain Shelton nodded a little dismissively. If that's the case, then let us return to the main topic. I still say the same thing, please lend Gasper Verdi to us. We need his power to deal with the Saipesh faction. His tone was as if he was not talking about a person, but an item. To Elmain Shelton, or the entire Camilla faction, what they were interested in was Gasper's hidden power, not Gasper himself. Understanding this point, everyone's face darkened. At this time, Elmain Shelton spoke again. Of course, we didn't come empty-handed. Elmain Shelton took a document from the vampire guard beside him, put it on the table, and pushed it in front of a satchel. Governor of the Fallen Angels, please take a look. Aesashurs frowned slightly and took the document. After glancing through it a few times, his expression began to turn ugly. I see. For the first time, Asashel looked at Elmain Shelton with an extremely unhappy gaze. The peace agreement on the Camilla side. Are you going to use this in exchange for us to hand over Gasper? What? Everyone was taken aback. Peace agreement? Taking out a peace agreement in this situation? This was simply telling everyone that if Gasper was not handed over to the Camilla faction, then the vampires would not conclude a peace agreement. As we all know, you are now issuing peace agreements to all forces equally for the peace of the world. In the past, you have contacted the vampires more than once, but at that time, we were too busy to respond. Elmain Shelton covered the corners of his mouth and said with a dignified and polite smile. Now, Her Highness the Queen of the Camilla faction has decided to accept everyone's peace agreement and show the greatest goodwill. If you don't respond to this agreement, then we'll take it that you refuse to join us vampires. In the future, we will no longer open our doors for you. Originally, when all the mythical forces except the vampires had concluded a peace agreement, a Sashal could force the vampires to abdicate and let them sit at the negotiating table. After all, the other forces had concluded a peace agreement, but the vampires intended to act alone. In that case, they could force the vampires to abdicate by saying that they were disrupting the peace. If the vampires did not have the idea of disrupting the peace, then why not conclude a peace agreement? And if the vampires had the idea of disrupting the peace, then all the forces would have a good reason to act. They could degrade the vampires to terrorists like the Disaster Squad and intervene by force. In the face of all the mythical forces in the world, how could a small force of vampires resist? Therefore, the final result was that the vampires had no choice but to sit at the negotiating table no matter how much they rejected contact with the other forces. In the end, when Elmine Shelton used this move, the situation was completely different. If Liaz and Asashel refused to hand Gasper over to the Camilla faction, then the Camilla faction would treat it as a failure of the negotiations and announce to the world that they wanted to conclude a peace agreement, but were rejected. In this way, from now on, the extremely xenophobic vampires would be able to justifiably stop contacting the other forces, and the other forces would no longer have a reason to target this point and force the vampires to conclude a peace agreement. That was why Asashel's expression was so ugly when he understood that. Elmine Shelton was playing the diplomatic card. In other words, he was using a servant of the next head of the Gimli family in exchange for the peace agreement of the entire Camilla faction. Liaz could not refuse. Because if she refused, in the eyes of the other forces, it would be seen as the demons taking the initiative to screw up the peace agreement with the vampires. The result would be that all the other forces would be dissatisfied, and the demons' credibility would plummet. If the entire demon world was harmed for a servant, then not to mention Liaz and the Gimli family, even Sazax, the demon king's right to speak would be severely reduced, and he would be firmly crushed by the others in terms of political power. Liaz, who understood the danger, began to tremble. That was caused by the anger in her heart. The conflict between vampires only needs to be resolved by the vampires themselves. That's enough. Elmine Shelton showed a victorious smile. So, all you need to do is lend Gasper Verratti to us, and there will be no more requests. We vampires do not need the intervention of outsiders. Undoubtedly, they had already proposed a peace agreement, and yet they still spoke as if they were against life forms other than vampires. This made everyone's hearts begin to burn with anger. These people were not sincere at all. Just when everyone was angry but didn't dare to say anything, Noah, who had been listening quietly at the side, let out a sigh, attracting everyone's attention. Then, Noah spoke for the first time since the beginning of the meeting. Liaz, Noah said very calmly. Refuse. Chapter 1910. When Noah's voice spread throughout the Paranormal Research Department's office, everyone suddenly fell silent. Liaz, Asashel, and the Jamanli's kin were all stunned on the spot. The victorious smile on Elmine Shelton's face suddenly froze. As if he had only just realized Noah's existence, Elmine Shelton's pair of red eyes turned to Noah. After sizing up Noah, he was surprised. Human? Elmine Shelton seemed to have thought of something. You are the Godslayer that all the mythical factions fear? In such an occasion, I hope you notice my other identity. Noah met Elmine Shelton's gaze and said very casually. I am the witness of the peace agreement between the factions. Since the Camilla faction has handed over the peace agreement at this time, then I should be able to speak, right? Since the famous Godslayer has said so, we naturally can't refuse. Elmine Shelton's tone was very stiff, and his gaze towards Noah was a little angry. However, your words just now, sir, can I take it that you have refused to conclude the peace agreement with us, the Camilla faction? Isn't that a matter of course? Noah said without hesitation. The so-called peace agreement is ultimately for world peace. Who needs to be sacrificed to get peace? That kind of peace, it's better not to have. With one sentence, the haze and hesitation in the hearts of Leah's, Asashel, and the Jamanli's kin were completely blown away. Well said, teacher. Leah's could not help but say. Who needs to be sacrificed to get peace? That kind of peace is definitely not what everyone wants to see. I have to say, I am also old and muddle-headed. Asashel laughed self-deprecatingly and threw the document in his hand directly on the table. You don't even understand such a simple principle, and even have hesitation. You have lived for so many years in vain. You. Elmaine Shelton was startled and couldn't believe what he was seeing. Are you really going to refuse the peace agreement of the vampires for a mere servant? Are you crazy? You're the one who's crazy, not us. Noah looked at Elmaine Shurston and said without a hint of confusion. Life is a priceless treasure. There is no difference between high and low, and there is no possibility of its value being reduced because of the quantity. Using a life to weigh the weight of an agreement is wrong in itself. Since I am the witness of the negotiation, I will not allow it to go on. The way Elmaine Shelton looked at Noah had completely changed. It became extremely inconceivable. It wasn't because Elmaine Shelton had been convinced by Noah's theory. On the contrary, Elmaine Shelton only felt that Noah's brain was broken. On the other side was a demon servant. On the other hand, the Camilla faction had joined. Everyone knew which side was more important, right? How dare he use the saying that life is a priceless treasure to make up the numbers? That kind of guy whose bloodline wasn't even pure. What kind of value would he have? Noah's voice was extremely abrupt, and it entered Elmaine Shelton's ears and pierced her heart. You must think so, right? Elmaine Shelton, whose thoughts were directly guessed, widened her eyes. Seeing this, Noah sneered. I say, Miss Vampire, personally, I really hate you vampires who treat bloodline as everything and take pride in your values. But I'm a human, and I don't have the right to use my values to criticize other people's values. But because of this, I need to remind you that since I didn't use my values to criticize you, then please don't use your self-righteous values to measure how much we value something. Noah glanced at Elmaine Shelton, whose expression changed slightly. In your eyes, it's just a mixed-blood bastard, but in our eyes, it's an irreplaceable companion. Do you think you can win by playing the diplomatic card? If that's the case, as a witness to the negotiation, I'll tell you my thoughts. Noah glanced around at everyone present and said in an unquestionable tone. I don't agree with this negotiation, and I suggest rejecting the negotiation with the Camilla faction. You. Elmaine Shelton's delicate face was replaced by anger. The situation that originally leaned towards the Camilla faction was directly declared to have collapsed because of Noah's words. This is your decision? Elmaine Shelton took a deep breath, suppressed the anger in her heart, and looked at Lise and Asashel. If you reject our negotiation, you won't get the vampires to join us in the future? Elmaine Shelton's words made both Leah's and Asashel hesitate. There was no way not to hesitate. Although Noah's words were very much in line with Lise and Asashel's thoughts, the agreement with the vampires was also extremely important. If the negotiation here broke down, there would be no chance to conclude a peace negotiation with the vampires in the future. In this way, as mentioned before, Lise and Asashel, who caused the negotiation to break down, would have to bear the responsibility, causing the demons and fallen angels to be condemned by all the other forces, resulting in a series of consequences. Therefore, Lise and Asashel still had to hesitate. However, at this time, Noah curled his lips and smiled. Who said we can't get the vampires to join us? Isn't there still the Sypesh faction? What? Elmaine Shelton was stunned at first, but then she immediately understood, and her expression finally changed drastically. Are you going to conclude a peace negotiation with the Sypesh faction? Since the Camilla faction is using such an attitude to negotiate with us, haven't you considered that this will push us to another faction in the vampire world? Noah looked at Elmaine Shelton and said with a faint smile. Since the Sypesh faction has caused you to be in danger with a Divine Destroyer relic, then with our help, the Camilla faction will probably be finished. When the time comes, we will conclude a peace negotiation with the Saipesh faction and also obtain the vampires' alliance. There won't be any problems, right? You. Elmaine Shelton lost her elegance for the first time. Her hand was trembling as she pointed at Noah, and her frighteningly white face was full of anger. You actually want to reconcile with a faction that has abandoned the dignity of the vampires to pursue the holy relic? Looking at you, you really didn't think of this. Noah sneered. That's true. In your opinion, no one would choose to be with a person who is willing to degenerate. But as I said just now, that's your value. To you, the Saipesh faction who is actually pursuing the holy relic is a group of lowly and degenerate people as residents of the dark side. But in our opinion, it's inconceivable that the dignity of the vampires is restricted to this aspect. Noah was extremely sarcastic. Of course, whether or not to conclude a peace negotiation with the Saipesh faction will have to wait until we sit down and have a good talk with them. As for you, go back and change your attitude, think about how to show your sincerity, and then come to us in the future. With that, Noah stood up directly, as if he had lost interest in Elmaine Shelton, and spoke to Yudu on the side. Yudu, send the insincere guest away. Elmaine Shelton stood up as if she couldn't bear it anymore, and a strong aura fluctuated all over her body. The two followers behind Elmaine Shelton also took a step forward with a furious expression, and their bodies trembled with visible coldness. However, that intimidating aura and coldness all collapsed and disappeared completely under Noah's casual gaze. With Elmaine Shelton taking the lead, the three vampires all took a step back. Tomorrow, we will go to the vampires' territory and make a trip to the Saipesh faction, Noah said calmly. You just have to pray that the Saipesh faction is the same as you and not to our liking. Otherwise, the Camilla faction won't exist in the vampire world for too long. The meeting thus ended with Noah's strong performance. Chapter 1911. Elmaine Shelton left with his two guards in a dejected manner. It was not until Elmaine Scherzinger left that the tense atmosphere in the Supernatural Research Department's office relaxed. Then, the group of Jamonli's followers cast admiring gazes at Noah. Teacher is amazing. Irina's eyes sparkled as she exclaimed excitedly. In just 2 or 3 moves, those annoying vampires were all defeated and fled. Those vampires are really annoying, Kitten said in a low voice. They're too self-righteous, everyone nodded. Noah's strength, for the Jamonli's followers, greatly helped them vent their anger. They all felt that their thoughts were a lot clearer. Unfortunately, this way, the Camilla faction's path is completely blocked. Athasher sighed. Although it was very satisfying to be so strong just now, there are many consequences. Next, if even the negotiations with the Opesh faction break down, then the vampires' alliance will really become impossible. This was undoubtedly very disadvantageous. However, Elmaine Scherzinger did not seem to have thought of this, so he was completely suppressed by Noah. However, since Noah chose to be strong, it proved that he had some confidence in his heart. At least, for Noah, since the vampires were in internal strife, there were as many loopholes as he wanted to take advantage of. It was not difficult to achieve his goal at all. Compared to that, what kind of power does the Holy Grail have? Noah said. I'm more concerned about this aspect. Hearing this, Athasher gave a direct answer. The power of the Holy Grail can subvert the common sense of life. Subvert the common sense of life? Noah was startled. That's right. Athasher nodded. Take vampires for example. Even ordinary people know their weaknesses. If they are stabbed in the heart by a wooden stake, they will die. If they are stabbed by a cross, they will die. If they are exposed to sunlight, and if they are hit by a silver weapon, they will be seriously injured. And the purer the bloodline, the more obvious these weaknesses are. Don't demons also have weaknesses of light and holiness? To demons, light was a deadly poison. Therefore, if the light power of angels and fallen angels hit a demon's body, it would definitely cause irreparable injuries or even death. As for the weakness of the divine attribute, that was even more obvious. For example, if a holy sword was struck by a weapon that specifically countered creatures of darkness and demonic nature, even its existence itself could be obliterated. That's a flaw that all living things are destined to have. Even gods have weaknesses. It's easier to understand if you say that it's a characteristic of life. Asashel narrowed his eyes. However, if the Holy Grail is using the power of the Holy Grail that can overturn the common sense of life, such weaknesses will be completely erased, and they will become a creature without any flaws. The Tsapishi faction probably wanted to use this power to become a flawless creature, right? However, in the eyes of the other vampires who were extremely concerned about their bloodlines, such behavior was simply negating everything about their bloodlines. Wouldn't it be a denial of the vampire's way of life if he were to modify himself at will? Therefore, to the Camilla faction who thought highly of themselves, the Tsapishi faction was a group of depraved people. It was not surprising that they felt that their existence was an insult to all vampires. This was the reason why Elmain Shurstin was so disgusted with the Tsapishi faction. However, everyone was more afraid of the power of the Holy Grail. A divine relic that overturns the common sense of life. Genova muttered. As expected of the holy relic that was once used to contain the blood of Jesus, although it was not like the Holy Grail of the Shade Moon world that could become a wish machine, in the category of manipulating life, the Holy Grail of this world could be said to be almost omnipotent. It said that if the power of the Holy Grail is used to the extreme, one can even obtain an eternal body. Even if the dead soul is resurrected, that's... Asashel said, but halfway through his sentence, he suddenly froze. It was as if he had been struck by lightning and remembered something extremely important. His eyes widened. Following that, Asashel could not help but mutter. Resurrection of the dead, vampires, evil dragons. This sentence caused Noah's eyes to flash. He suddenly raised his head and met Asashel's gaze. The group of Jimenez's followers were not fools. They immediately understood what Noah and Asashel were thinking of. The evil dragon. The evil dragon that was resurrected by the disaster squad. The evil dragon that should have been completely destroyed was actually resurrected. Did this not seem like the common sense of life had been overturned? In other words, the resurrection of the evil dragon was most likely due to the power of the Holy Grail. Now, the mystery is solved. Noah was speechless. No wonder that fellow called Euclid said to meet again in the territory of the vampires. So, the vampires have really joined forces with the disaster squad? Everyone was speechless. Since the evil dragon was resurrected, it proved that the Holy Grail that fell into the hands of the Saipesh faction was indeed used by the disaster squad. There was no room for objection. Moreover, the Saipesh faction was already using the Holy Grail to perfect their own lives. They had done something that the Camilla faction saw as tarnishing their own bloodline. So, they would not be as proud of their bloodline as everyone had guessed, and not contact the disaster squad, right? In other words, even if the Saipesh faction did not join the disaster squad, they were definitely in cahoots with the disaster squad. We're in big trouble now. Asashel's eyebrows were tightly furrowed. It seems that this trip to the vampires' territory will not only involve us in the conflict between the Saipesh faction and the Camilla faction, but also clash with the disaster squad. And our previous plan is completely ruined. Lyeth was also frustrated. If the Saipesh faction is really in cahoots with the disaster squad, then there's no way we can reach a peace agreement with the Saipesh vampires. And the negotiations with the Camilla faction have already broken down. Zhu Nai said worriedly. It seems that the peace agreement with the vampires is really not going to happen. The atmosphere began to become heavy. However, Noah chuckled and dispelled the heavy atmosphere in one fell swoop. No, this is actually more beneficial to us. Noah looked at Asashel. If the Saipesh faction is really in cahoots with the disaster squad, then even if they are harboring criminals wanted by all forces, we have the right to intervene, right? Asashel? Ah, we have the right. Asashel also showed a smirk. As long as we can intervene and break the vampires' insistence of not contacting the outside world for many years, then the values of the inhabitants of the vampire world will definitely be impacted. By then, even if they are unwilling, the vampires will have to sit down with us and have a talk. As long as there was a chance to talk, the vampires were destined to be at a disadvantage under the pressure of all the mythical forces in the world. By then, they could bring up the matter of hiding the terrorists of the disaster squad. In order to avoid being treated as an accomplice of the disaster squad, the vampires could only raise their hands and surrender, obediently signing the peace agreement. The only thing left is the lack of evidence. Noah snapped his fingers. Asashel, the original plan remains unchanged. We will go to the vampires' territory tomorrow. If the disaster squad appears there, then the evidence is conclusive and no one can doubt it. But then, the possibility of conflict with the disaster squad and the Saipesh faction at the same time is also very high. Asashel stroked his chin and suddenly smiled as if he thought of something. Looks like I have to find a few reliable guards to go with me. Let's go together. Liaz pressed on Gasper's shoulder with a determined look on her face. What kind of power is hidden in Gasper's body? I am very concerned about this, and I have to find out. Me too. Although Gasper was very hesitant, he also had a determined look on his face. I don't want to be seen as a strange thing. If there is really some strange power in my body, at least I have to find out about it. Is that so? Noah looked at Liaz and Gasper, then looked at the Jamanli's kin and nodded. In that case, you will be my guards and come with me. Yes. Teacher. The Jamanli's kin answered in unison. Just like that, the plan to go to the vampires' territory was put on the agenda. Chapter 1912. The nation of vampires was not a particularly big secret to the people of the inner world. That was because it was in the human world. Moreover, it was deep in the mountains of Romania. Usually, the surroundings of that deep mountain would be covered by a very high-level barrier. That barrier not only had the function of blocking incoming enemies but also had the function of concealment and interception. Concealment naturally referred to the concealment of the scenery within the territory. Outsiders would only see a dense mountain and not a nation of vampires. Interception referred to methods such as blocking teleportation magic that could directly enter the territory of vampires. Therefore, if one wanted to enter the nation of vampires, they would either have to register in the nation of vampires so that they could directly use teleportation magic to enter in the future, or they could only go on foot. In view of this, everyone needed to first fly to Europe through multiple teleportation magic before heading to the vampire territory in Romania. Of course, that did not mean that everyone would really have to walk over. It was just that they could not perform instant teleportation. Therefore, Asashel had already prepared a variety of means of transportation over there. There were not only vehicles but also planes. They were quite well prepared. As for the travel expenses, there was no need to worry at all. Not to mention that Asashel was the governor of the fallen angels and had the support of an entire force behind him. Even Liaz was the next master of the Gimli family and was extremely wealthy. There was no need to worry about such things at all. Therefore, everyone only prepared some luggage before dawn. After dawn, under the lead of Noah and Asashel, they entered the teleportation magic formation and teleported to Europe in one go. Then, they boarded a plane and headed to Romania. After arriving at their destination, everyone changed to vehicles and drove into the mountain road to head to the vampire territory. Due to the large number of people, there were a total of 10 Gimli family members. In addition to Noah and Asashel, there were a total of 12 people. One vehicle was naturally not enough. The preparation of the vehicles was not a problem. Even though they were in a hurry, Asashel still prepared 2 vehicles. Junai, Genova, Irina, Gasper, and Losvias shared a vehicle, and the driver was Yudu. Noah, Liaz, Aisha, Kitten, and Label shared a vehicle, and the driver was Asashel. Mountain roads were always difficult to advance. Along the way, everyone was in a bumpy ride. After a full hour of bumpy ride, they had only covered less than half of the journey. The surroundings were filled with thick fog. If it was an ordinary person, not to mention driving, even if they walked, they wouldn't dare to rush through such a dense fog, right? Otherwise, once they got lost in such a deep mountain, it would be almost fatal. Not to mention, if something went wrong and he fell off the cliff under the influence of the fog, he might even lose his life. However, Asashel continued to drive with ease, as though the fog had no effect on him at all. He continued to drive forward. Noah, who was sitting in the passenger seat, glanced at the rearview mirror. In the back seats, Liath, Aisha, Kitten, and Laybell were all fast asleep. Listening to the orderly breathing of the girls, Noah suddenly spoke. "Have Vale and the others arrived?" His words made Athashel's hands tremble, and he almost drove off the cliff. "You?" Asashel uttered in shock and helplessness. "Have you already guessed it?" "I guessed it a long time ago." Noah pursed his lips. "Since you said you wanted to find a few reliable guards, but didn't let them move with us, who else could it be other than the shameful Vale and his teammates?" Vale's situation wasn't very good. Because he took Orpheus away without permission, Vale was regarded as a traitor by the Disaster Syndicate, and was currently wanted by the Disaster Syndicate. Vale and his group were former terrorists, and were also wanted by the major mythical organizations. Under such circumstances, Vale and his group were like rats crossing the street, and everyone wanted to beat them up. If they didn't live in hiding, how could they avoid the arrest of the two factions? However, Vale shouldn't think that there was anything wrong with this situation, right? After all, being wanted by all the mythical organizations and all the terrorists at the same time, and there was an endless stream of people chasing after them, it would definitely greatly satisfy that battle maniac. It was just that Vale himself was very satisfied, but whether Athashel would continue to look at it like this was another matter. After all, he was raised by you from a young age. He is equivalent to your son. Noah said with a smile. If possible, you must try your best to lead Wally back to the right path and let him return to your side. However, it is also a fact that Wally used to be a terrorist. If you directly bring him back, you will definitely be troubled by the major forces. Since that is the case, it is not strange to find a way to let Wally redeem himself and make up for his mistakes, right? If he wanted to redeem himself and make up for his mistakes, wasn't this trip to the vampire camp a good opportunity? If the members of the disaster group could be found in this operation, it would promote the successful conclusion of the peace agreement between the vampires. At that time, even if Athathiel brought Varley back to the fallen angel camp, no one would gossip about it anymore. I really can't hide anything from you. You are indeed the God Slayer who single-handedly promoted all the mythical organizations to conclude the peace treaty. I can't help but admire you. Athashel smiled bitterly. Well, after all, Vale's team is full of some amazing guys. The first son Wukong, the descendants of the King of Knights of Great Britain and the Cat Elf, the demon wolf who can even kill gods, and the strongest white dragon emperor in history. It is not a bad thing for us to win over this force, right? That's not something I should care about. Noah shrugged. I am just a witness to the peace treaty between the various forces. You can think about things outside the peace treaty. It has nothing to do with me. You are quite clear about it. Athashel snorted. However, Orpheus has always been feared by the major mythical forces because he doesn't have direct contact with them. If he maintains an aloof status, the deterrence of the major mythical forces will be greater. You can continue like this. Anyway, world peace depends on you, Lord Godslayer. World peace? Noah smiled without denying it, then asked directly. So, where are Vale and the others now? They are probably in the territory of the vampires and have sneaked in. Before they are clean, those guys can't enter the territory openly, Athashel said. By the way, yesterday, Vale was also attacked by an evil dragon. Attacked by an evil dragon? Noah raised his eyebrows. Is it Glendale again? No, the evil dragon Vale encountered was not Glendale. Athashel's expression became a little solemn. Vale encountered Az-Dahaka, the three-headed demonic dragon of the sect of fire. Noah's pair of dark and deep eyes flickered slightly. Athashel did not notice Noah's reaction and continued to drive while saying so. The dark dragon of New Moon, Klon Kawa, the forbidden dragon of Mana Pool, Az-Dahaka, and the dark dragon of origin, Apophis. These three evil dragons are of the highest level even among all the evil dragons. They are second only to the red dragon emperor and the white dragon emperor of the two heavenly dragons. If the disaster squad really intends to use the power of the evil dragons, they will definitely target these three evil dragons. Therefore, we have to be mentally prepared in advance to face these three terrifying evil dragons. Compared to Glendale, Arizona, Dahaka was undoubtedly much stronger. If the disaster squad used the power of the Holy Grail to revive all the evil dragons that were as famous as AZ Dahaka, it would be a huge threat even to the major forces. Because this time we have you, an out-of-the-norm god slayer, with us, we can come with such a large number of troops. Athashel sighed. Otherwise, in the face of enemies like the three-headed evil dragons, the rest of the evil dragons, the disaster squad, and the vampires Taipshi faction, it would not be strange even if the major forces sent out their gods to form a crusade team. Noah fell into silence. AZ Dahaka. The three-headed demonic dragon of the sect of fire. The highest level of evil dragon. Thinking of this, Noah suddenly laughed. Then let me see what kind of ability the three-headed demonic dragon that has not transcended its own myth and become the final trial of mankind is capable of. Chapter 1913. Wow! At the top of a cliff, the young girls of the gypsies looked at the scene in front of them and couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. That was a rare sight of snow in normal times. Romania was a country with almost the same solar cycle as Japan. If Japan was welcoming winter, it was almost winter here too. However, the temperature here was lower and colder than Japan, and some places snowed all winter. This was one of those places. Therefore, the scene in front of them was completely covered by white snow, and the temperature was quite low. Even demons would feel cold. Therefore, the gypsies had already changed into winter clothes, and only Noah and Athaziel were still wearing their own clothes. Looking ahead, everyone could clearly see a city in front of them. It was a city surrounded by a hazy fog. That was naturally the city of vampires. In the city of vampires, the modern buildings were like a circle surrounding a magnificent castle. That castle was the royal city of the Capes faction. The buildings around the royal city had a contemporary style, as well as ancient medieval mansions. Combined together and covered with thick snow, it looked quite incredible. However, regardless of whether they were modern mansions or ancient mansions, the buildings here all shared a common characteristic. That was, no matter which building it was, there were very few windows, or even none at all. For vampires who lived in the dark, the purpose of windows was probably just for ventilation, and not for sunlight to shine in. After all, sunlight was the weakness of vampires. Because of this, at this time of the day, almost all vampires who were night residents were sleeping at home, and very few people were walking around in the city. Even if there were people walking around, those people would wear thick clothes in order to not expose their skin. Of course, even if they didn't do this, there would still be people who moved around during the day, right? Noah heard that vampires were divided into daywalkers and nightwalkers. As the name implied, the former were vampires who could move around in the sun, but they were relatively rare. The latter were absolute residents of the dark, completely unable to move around in the sun, and made up the majority of vampires. Gasper inherited the bloodline of a daywalker, and with his human part, Gasper could move around in the sun as usual. Other than that, the night walkers were also active during the day. Because in the vampire city, it was always shrouded in a very thick fog during the day. It was a fog created by a vampire's ability. Controlling fog was one of the abilities of vampires. If it was a high-ranking vampire, it wouldn't be strange for him to create a fog that covered an entire city. The fog was both a barrier and a means to detect the enemy. It could also block the sunlight, allowing the vampires to gain a certain degree of mobility during the day. By the way, the Camilla faction was located not too far away from here. Therefore, the arrival of Noah and his party should not only have been reported to the Capaci faction, but also to the Camilla faction. Our first destination is the royal city of the Sapishi faction, Athathiel said to everyone. There, we need to talk to King Seps first, and then decide what to do next. The arrival of Noah and his party must have attracted the attention of the Kepeshi faction and the Camilla faction. Next, the Kepeshi faction should send someone here to contact Noah and his party. The Camilla faction, whose negotiations had failed, should also make corresponding countermeasures. It was even possible that they would send someone to prevent Noah and his party from contacting the Kepeshi faction. In other words, a battle could happen at any time. If they didn't enter a state of alert at this time, they would definitely be at a disadvantage if they were ambushed. Under such circumstances, Athathiel had entered a state of mental concentration, and the Jamanli's followers were in a formation. Although it was called a formation, it was actually to let Gasper, who was in charge of support, and Isha, who was in charge of healing, stay in the middle. The rest of the people surrounded the two of them, ready to deal with the enemy at any time. Only Noah left the main group and went forward boldly. He came to the edge of the cliff and looked at the city in the distance. At this time, Noah felt that the huge city was shrouded in an undercurrent instead of a fog. There was an indescribable sense of oppression. It's too quiet. Noah couldn't help but whisper. There's an indescribable silence. It's like the dead silence before the storm. This was the feeling that the Kepeshi faction's capital gave Noah. And this feeling gradually became stronger as time passed. The Jamanli's followers began to look at each other. Asashel furrowed his brows tightly as he muttered under his breath. That's not right. It's been so long. Even if the Camilla faction didn't take action, the Kepeshi faction should have taken action. Why hasn't anyone come? This was really a little abnormal. For the extremely xenophobic vampires, if someone broke into their territory, it was impossible not to send someone to check. But until now, neither the Kepeshi faction nor the Camilla faction had come. That was too abnormal. Just as this thought appeared in everyone's mind, Noah's eyes flashed, and he withdrew his gaze from the vampire city. He turned his head and looked in another direction. Seeing Noah's action, the Jamanli's followers were stunned. Only Athathiel immediately turned his head and looked in that direction with Noah. It seems that we have someone else to entertain us. Asashel folded his arms, and 12 black wings suddenly spread out from his back. His gaze was fixed in front of him. Aren't you going to come out and say hello? If the Jamanli's followers still did not react, they would be real fools. At that moment, all the Jamanli subordinates suddenly turned around and stared ahead, mana fluctuations rising from their bodies. It was only at this moment that a casual voice sounded softly. Was it so easy to be discovered? As expected of the governor of the gods' layers and fallen angels. As these words were spoken, a figure slowly walked out from the forest in front of them. The newcomer had a head of silver hair. It was not Wally. It was Euclid, who Noah had met once yesterday. Sure enough, we meet again in the territory of the vampires. Euclid immediately looked at Noah and spread his hands. I knew you would come sooner or later, but I didn't expect it to be so soon. Noah didn't say anything. He just looked at Euclid. Nobody knew what he was thinking. On the other hand, Liath looked at the silver-haired Euclid with a somewhat bewildered expression. That appearance, that silver hair, and that aura, it's like, really like, Liath's whisper clearly reached Euclid's ears. Euclid turned his gaze and looked at Liath. Looking at Liath's bright red hair, his eyes became extremely cold and indifferent. Same to you, Liath Gimli. When I see your red hair, I can't help but think of Sazax, that hateful fake demon king. A fake demon king? She stared straight at Euclid. Are you a demon of the old demon king's faction? You don't need to know. No, it should be said that you will know sooner or later, Euclid said coldly. Then, his gaze turned back to Noah. You are a little late. Just last night, there was a coup in the Saipesh faction. Now, the Saipesh king has fled, and a new king has been born. That person is the holder of the Holy Grail. W.H. What? Asashel exclaimed. Coup. Coup. Gimli's kin were also shocked. Even Noah was slightly startled and showed a surprised expression. Coup? A coup at this time? Isn't that too much of a coincidence? Could this also be the arrangement of the Mass of Calamity? By the way, the newly crowned king is no stranger to the vampires over there. Euclid glanced at Gasper, the corners of his mouth slowly rising. The new king is called Valery Saipesh. You haven't forgotten, have you? Va. Valery? Gasper's eyes widened, full of disbelief. That expression made Euclid smile happily. If you rush over now, you might be able to see a good show. After saying that, Euclid decisively retreated and left the scene. Wait. Gimli's kin instinctively wanted to chase after him. Don't chase. Asashel immediately stopped them and said with a serious expression. Saipesh is more important now. The Jumanli subordinates glanced at each other and stopped. Asashel then looked at Noah. Noah met Asashel's gaze, nodded, and said concisely. Let's go. Everyone immediately soared into the sky without hesitation, turning into streaks of light as they flew towards the foggy vampire city, rushing towards the royal city of Opesh at top speed. Flying in the air, the cold wind whistled in their ears. However, Noah could still clearly hear Gasper's low muttering. Valery. How could? It seemed that things were far more troublesome than he had imagined. Chapter 1914. Whoosh. The gale continued to howl. It was extremely cold and stung everyone's skin. With Noah and Asashel taking the lead, the gypsies spread their bat-like demonic wings and flew towards the royal city of Seeps as fast as they could. The buildings under them were like a revolving lantern, constantly receding behind them. Undoubtedly, there was a coup in the royal city. Even the new king had been elected, and the Seeps king was still on the run. However, the residents outside the royal city were calm as if nothing had happened. It made one's heart palpitate. Under such circumstances, everyone flew forward as fast as they could. Until a certain moment, a strange pressure suddenly surged from the front like an invisible wave and enveloped Noah's group. Everyone who was flying at high speed revealed shocked expressions one after another. Stop! Athashel yelled out. All of a sudden, Asashel and his subordinates came to an abrupt halt in midair, as though someone had slammed on the brakes. Feeling the pressure that pervaded the entire space, Noah also stopped. For the first time, his expression became solemn. Because the pressure was extremely strong. It was so strong that it was comparable to any of the three main gods of Greek mythology, Zeus, Hades, and Poseidon that Noah had fought before. Under this pressure, Noah slowly raised his head and looked forward. On the only way to Seeps' royal city, a figure seemed to be waiting for the arrival of Noah and his party. He slowly floated in midair. It was a man. A very inconceivable man. The man was wearing a black coat, and his hair was fluttering in the wind. It was black and gold, as if they were naturally intertwined. The man's eyes also had two colors. His left eye was a very deep black. His right eye was a very bright gold. The aura that fluctuated around him seemed to be able to grasp one's heart tightly and crush it into pieces. It was terrifying and dangerous. Looking at the figure who had appeared out of nowhere and blocked everyone's path, everyone's body tensed up and cold sweat began to drip down their faces. Including Asashel. At this moment, everyone clearly understood one thing. That man was definitely not ordinary. It was not a joke. The oppressive aura emanating from that person's body was already stronger than that of a god or demon king. It's him? Asashel stared at the man and clenched his fists. Did he really resurrect? Resurrect. Since Asashel said so, the man's identity was almost revealed. It can't be. Genova's voice became a little hoarse. Is that man an evil dragon? That's right. That man was an evil dragon. At least, Noah's superb senses told him that the aura fluctuating from that man was definitely not an aura that a human could have. It was an evil aura that was deeper, denser, and scarier than Glendale's. Although it was not like Glendale's aura that gave off a clear sense of evil, the man's aura made one's head tremble and constantly send a message to his master. Danger. That man was extremely dangerous. At this moment, Draeger's voice also rang in Noah's mind. Although he looks like a human, but with this aura, I don't even need to think to know who he is. Partner, you've encountered a powerful dragon. That guy, is he really an evil dragon? It's not just an evil dragon, it's the infamous evil dragon, Dalag said. Even among the evil dragons, he is one of the strongest existences, the dark dragon of the new moon Clon Cuvok. Clon Cuvok. The descendant of the Celtic demon god Balor. He had killed the divine king of the Danu gods, Nuada. He was one of the strongest evil dragons alongside Az Dahaka and Apophis. Now, he appeared in front of Noah's group in his human form. Who would have thought that they would encounter one of the strongest evil dragons in the legends at this time? Clon Cuvok was one of the strongest among the dragon kings, only below the sky dragon level. The group of underage demons were so nervous that their palms were sweating. This is going to be troublesome, Asashel couldn't help but mutter. Even if it's me, I'm still no match for that guy. Yes. Even the governor, whose strength was above the ordinary demon king level and enjoyed the highest level of power in the fallen angel camp, was no match for Clon Cuvok. Otherwise, Noah wouldn't be so serious. Noah glanced at the Opesh kingdom in front of him, then looked at Clon Cuvok, who was emitting a terrifying aura, and said indifferently, "You guys go first. You guys go first. Leave this to me." Teacher. The Jamonli subordinates were startled and turned to look at Noah. Let's go. Asashel said decisively. Noah is the only one among us who can suppress that strongest evil dragon. If we stay, we'll just be a hindrance. With that said, Asashel didn't hesitate at all. He flapped the 12 wings on his back and flew in the direction of the Sepe's royal city. The Zamonli subordinates hesitated. Let's go. Liaz bit her lip and ordered. Leave this to teacher. As soon as Liaz gave the order, the Zymonians had nothing else to say. Teacher, please be careful. With that, the Jamonli subordinates followed behind Athashel and flew in the direction of the Kapezi royal city. Clon Cuvok didn't even move when he saw Athashel and the Jamonli's kin flying towards Kaipesh. His gaze landed directly on Noah's body. Noah, who was prepared to launch a thunderous attack when Clon Cuvok attacked Liaz and the others, raised an eyebrow. He met Clon Cuvok's gaze and seemed to understand something. I see. Noah understood instantly. So he's coming for me from the beginning? Although he's different from that lunatic Glendale, Clon Cuvok is very interested in powerful dragons, Drake said. He probably knows that you're the current Crimson Dragon Emperor, so he's interested in you. You have to be careful. That guy isn't something Glendale can compare to. An evil dragon that was second only to a sky dragon. As one of the two sky dragons, Drake knew very well the difference between Clon Cuvok and Glendale. That was why even though he knew about Noah's abilities, Drake couldn't help but remind him. Bam! However, before Deleg could finish his sentence, a deep sonic boom suddenly resounded. The figure in front of him suddenly shot in front of Noah like a cannonball. He clenched his hand, which turned into a ferocious dragon claw. With a sharp sound, he cut through the air and viciously clawed at Noah's chest. That attack came suddenly and fiercely, and there was no room for error. Once hit, even if he didn't die, he would definitely be severely injured. If Noah didn't have superb senses, he probably wouldn't have been able to react in time, right? That was why Noah's eyes suddenly focused, and the majestic energy circulating in his body instantly turned into divine power. Wang! In the next instant, a dazzling golden aura fluctuated around Noah's body. It condensed and quickly turned into a solid shield of light. Piaschish. The sharp and ferocious dragon claw didn't stop at all. It directly landed on the shield of light and actually pierced through it. Immediately after, the sharp dragon claw was like a deadly scythe. It didn't lose its momentum and went straight for Noah's chest. Seeing that, Noah's eyes became more and more focused, but he didn't dodge. Instead, his entire body surged with even more violent divine power, replenishing the penetrated shield of light. The shield of light that was cleanly penetrated was replenished by the vast divine power. It was as if it was frozen, and the sharp and ferocious dragon claw was firmly locked in place. The ferocious dragon claw that swept towards Noah's chest suddenly stopped. In the next second, Noah spat out a word. Explode. The condensed shield of light flashed with intense light. Chapter 19:15. Kaboom! In the foggy sky, a thunderous roar suddenly resounded, shaking the extremely dense fog in the surroundings to the point that it suddenly stagnated. It was as if it was swept up by a gale, stirring up the fog. The violent impact was accompanied by a burst of dazzling light in the air. It was as if a meteorite had suddenly exploded there, stirring up an extremely powerful shock wave and dazzling light that surged to the surroundings like a tide. Immediately after, two figures were blasted out from the explosion, causing friction with the air. Under the sharp sound of breaking through the air, as if riding on the powerful shock wave, they slid hundreds of meters away before finally coming to a stop. Noah raised his eyes and looked ahead. Coincidentally, Klon Kuwak also looked over, and a hint of emotion finally appeared in its heterochromatic eyes. After an unknown amount of time, the powerful shockwave and blinding light that swept across the sky gradually dissipated. Noah and Klon Kuwak stood some distance apart, looking at each other as if they were both getting to know each other again. They fell into silence. After a while, Klon Kuwak spoke. "You are very strong." As soon as he spoke, the legendary mystic dragon, who enjoyed the title of the strongest evil dragon, acknowledged Noah's strength. That extremely sincere tone caused Noah to be involuntarily stunned, and a strange feeling arose in his heart. Evil dragons were extremely dangerous and uncontrollable existences. This was something that Drake had mentioned to Noah in the beginning. Therefore, almost all of the legendary evil dragons had been exterminated, and only left behind in history. Because of this, Noah thought that the evil dragons were like Glendale. Even if they weren't as crazy, there must be something wrong with them. However, Klon Kuwak gave Noah a feeling similar to Orpheus. It wasn't that Klon Kuwak was as innocent as Orpheus, but that it was in his heart. This strongest evil dragon seemed to be like Orpheus, very pure, and not as crazy and dangerous as Noah had imagined. The more powerful the dragon, the purer it is. Recalling what Drake had told him in the past, Noah felt that this theory could be applied to the evil dragons as well. However, no matter how pure the cloned Kua was, this evil dragon was still very dangerous. There was no doubt about that. Disregarding everything else, the power displayed by the other party just now was enough to put Noah in danger several times. The title of the strongest evil dragon below the heavenly dragon was not just for show. Noah suppressed the strange feeling in his heart and met Klon Kvoch's gaze. "You are also stronger than I thought. Other than Orpheus, you are the strongest dragon I have ever seen in this world." As expected of the evil dragon who once killed the divine king of the Danu gods. "However, if you want to stop me, you should at least show your true form, right?" Although he was facing Noah as a human, Klon Kuvok was undoubtedly a dragon. Just now, when Klon Kuvok attacked Noah, didn't he transform his arm into a ferocious dragon claw? This proved that Klon Kuvaka's current form was only a disguise, and his true form was still that of a dragon. And of course, only by transforming into a true dragon would Klon Kuvaka's full strength be displayed. In the short exchange just now, Klon Kuvok did not use his full strength at all. Klon Kuvok seemed to have seen through Noah's thoughts and shook his head lightly. Indeed, the power that the dragon form and the human form can display is different, but in terms of strength, the difference isn't that big. After all, although the dragon form can display more power, the human form is more flexible in all aspects and has its own advantages. Changing one's form according to the situation will also be very advantageous in battle. And I think that, to deal with you, it's not enough to just rely on brute force. So, in the attack just now, I used my human form and also transformed into a dragon's hand. It can be considered as a half-dragon, which should be the best form to deal with you. As he said that, Crone Kovac stared at Noah with a burning gaze. Also, you didn't use the power of a dragon, did you? I know that you are the current Crimson Dragon Emperor. From Clone Kovac's eyes and words, Noah could feel the other party's attachment to the word dragon. Just like what Drake said, Clone Kovac must have an unusual view and thought about dragons. Understanding this, Noah, who was preparing to use another cosmology, glanced at Clone Kovac with a meaningful look. Then, he dismissed the idea of using another cosmology. Now was the time to race against time. The coup d'état in Seep's kingdom was still ongoing. With that in mind, the best course of action was to use another cosmology and take down the strongest evil dragon. However, with Clone Kovac's attachment to dragons, if Noah couldn't satisfy him, perhaps this evil dragon would be like Glendale and pester Noah until he died. In that case, in terms of time, it would be more likely that he would be pestered even longer after using another cosmology. If that's the case, I might as well satisfy you a little. As soon as Noah finished speaking, a crimson-red gauntlet flashed and appeared on his right hand. Clone Kovac's gaze immediately landed on the gauntlet. His black and gold eyes seemed to be able to see the soul residing in the divine artifact. He spoke softly. Long time no see, Drake. Clone Kovac's words made the jade on the back of the gauntlet flash. Indeed, it has been a long time. Drake's voice came from the jade. The last time we met was when I wasn't sealed and you weren't destroyed, right? The last time we met, you weren't like this. Clone Kovac tilted his head and said. However, you're wrong about one thing. I haven't been destroyed. Wah. What? Noah was stunned. Haven't been destroyed? Drake was even more shocked. You haven't been destroyed? That's right. Clone Kovac nodded. Let's not talk about the other evil dragons, but I haven't been destroyed. After all, compared to the other evil dragons, I'm considered honest, so no one targeted me. In other words, you've been alive since ancient times until now? Drake seemed to be in disbelief. Then what have you been doing all this time? Nothing much. Clone Kovac said. I've been observing dragons all over the world and persisted in training. Such a pure and honest answer. Not to mention Drake, even Noah was speechless. Observing dragons all over the world all this time? With Clone Kovac's persistence towards dragons, that was indeed possible. But persisting in training all this time? Since before Drake was sealed, Clone Kovac had persisted in training all this time? In that case, what level had the evil dragon, who had been known as the strongest evil dragon after the heavenly dragon, reached? As if he saw through Noah and Drake's thoughts, Clone Kovac suddenly smiled and his entire body surged with a terrifying aura. That aura was far more powerful than what they felt before. That was what Clone Kovac had said. Now, even if it's the old Drake, I don't think I'll lose. His words caused Noah's eyes to narrow slowly. I've miscalculated, partner. Drake's voice became serious. Clone Kovac has probably surpassed himself and reached the level of a Rubian and I. What did this mean? That evil dragon has most likely reached the level of a sky dragon. Even if it's compared to the top 10 in the world, it wouldn't lose out. This was Clone Kovac's true strength. At this moment, a burst of laughter rang out in the air. An evil dragon that has reached the level of a sky dragon? I'm interested in you. Following this sentence, a white meteor shot out from the other side of the sky. Chapter 1916. Silver Juggernaut Overdrive. Fall. The absolute law to the White Dragon Emperor of Darkness, Noah, on the other hand, was completely stunned. That juggernaut form can only be used for a few minutes. If the power is overused, it may even be counted in seconds. Therefore, Wally Lucifer will probably end the battle quickly. Noah directly went into the hole. Just as Drake had said, Varley's figure suddenly transformed into a white meteor, drawing several beautiful trajectories as he violently shot towards Clon Kvocha's direction. In the flash of silver, the pure white color of Wally's armor was mixed with silver, gradually turning into a silver full-body armor. Its shape also changed slightly, becoming like an organic composition. The two heavenly dragons that have been fighting and killing since ancient times are actually standing together like this. It's really a rare scene. The most basic point was that the Tyrannosaurus was a power born from a curse. When it was activated, it would be accompanied by astonishing resentment and hatred. It was extremely ominous. Is that so? Clon Kvocha stopped smiling and nodded very seriously. That's right. A battle without any glory is meaningless. Even if you are a dragon that is called the embodiment of power, you should follow your own glory and fight. Thank you for letting me see your way of the dragon, White Dragon Emperor. It was a power that was very similar to the Tyrannosaurus, but it was poles apart. The two were actually evenly matched. It looked like a real white dragon. A coup was taking place in the royal city, but the ordinary residents outside were not aware of it at all. With such a whisper, an unprecedented and astonishing power soared from Wally's body, turning into spiritual energy that was visible to the naked eye, surging in all directions. However, Wally Lucifer has adjusted the Tyrannosaurus and redeveloped it. He only drew out the power of the Tyrannosaurus and completely swallowed the curse with his own fighting spirit, causing the Tyrannosaurus to evolve into a new form. It avoids danger and can still grow. It was difficult for a heavenly dragon's power to defeat a real heavenly dragon for only a few minutes. Varley's whole body swelled with a terrifying aura, like a hurricane, sweeping in all directions. With that, Noah no longer paid any attention to the two meteors colliding repeatedly in the sky. They flew in the direction of the royal city of Opesh. It was just that Noah's swaggering intrusion attracted a huge commotion. Clon Kvocha, one of the strongest evil dragons in the legends. He has been training since ancient times, and has already reached the level of a heavenly dragon. Varley stared at Clon Kvocha, his voice filled with battle intent. The deafening sound of the collision resounded. I just think that a battle without glory is meaningless, Wally said bluntly. Simply put, Tyrannosaurus Rex had no side effects at all. Tyrannosaurus Rex without any side effects. I shall become the Immaculate Dragon Emperor. Sensing the terrifying aura emanating from Wally's body, Clon Kvocha's expression became more and more solemn, but at the same time, his fighting spirit also burned like flames. However, at this moment, the Tyrannosaurus Rex that Wally activated did not have any negative emotions or ominous aura. Under such circumstances, Wally bathed in an astonishing amount of spirit energy, like an erupting volcano. The wings of light on his back spread out, and one of his hands was raised high. The pure white armor was wrapped in a holy light, and the precious gems on every part of it immediately blossomed with dazzling light. I shall awaken as an opponent. It's really the most suitable. However, at this moment, a big hole had been broken in the barrier. It should be the work of Asashel and Jumanli's subordinates. Moreover, it was Wally who had entered the forbidden state. Because the opponent also chose to fight with pure strength, that's why they are evenly matched, right? But it was precisely because of this that Noah was so surprised. Noah, who had seen Wally's Tyrannosaurus Rex, was certain that the power Wally was using now was very similar to Tyrannosaurus Rex, but it was fundamentally different from Tyrannosaurus Rex. The power that the previous Crimson Dragon Emperor and White Dragon Emperor were unable to achieve was now finally achieved by Wally. If we must fight, I hope to challenge him as Wally Lucifer, and not follow the fate of the Crimson Dragon Emperor and White Dragon Emperor and fight without any purpose. The white meteor and the black meteor soared into the sky like two thunderbolts chasing after each other. All the way up, they collided again and again, stirring up sounds of collision that shook the heavens and the earth. It set off waves of shockwaves that stirred up the space, causing this part of the world to suddenly become a battlefield that no one could enter. In terms of strength alone, Tyrannosaurus Rex is definitely at the heavenly dragon level. Since that Tyrannosaurus Rex has inherited all of Tyrannosaurus Rex's strength, it's naturally the same. However, if it's just strength that's at the heavenly dragon level, it can't compare to the strongest evil dragon that has truly reached the heavenly dragon level, Drake said. What did this mean? Even so, in the end, Wally should be undefeatable, right? The energy fluctuations on Wally's body continued to rise, causing space to distort slightly. The surrounding fog also became chaotic and trembled. If that's the case, then thank me with a battle. Wally took a step forward and said in a low voice. I won't accompany you, Klon Kvotch. Let's fight again next time if we have the chance. I will lead thee to the pinnacle of silver fantasy and demonic path. This generation's Crimson Dragon Emperor and White Dragon Emperor are both terrifying existences that the previous generations cannot compare to. Although Tyrannosaurus Rex is very outstanding in terms of strength, it is accompanied by life-threatening danger and the possibility of going berserk. That is a cursed power. Drake's voice sounded in Noah's mind. Klon Kvotch resolutely used his full strength against Wally, who was using Tyrannosaurus Rex. A shockwave suddenly spread out like a huge explosion, setting off a frenzied airflow that mixed with the dense fog in the surroundings and rushed in all directions. In the next second, Klon Kvotch turned into a black meteor and shot forward, meeting the white meteor head-on. White Dragon Emperor. Klon Kvotch looked at Wally, then looked at Noah, who was standing side by side with Wally and couldn't help but smile. It was a person covered in pure white armor with a pair of faint blue light wings on his back. A burst of silver light blossomed from Wally's body, instantly illuminating the entire world and dispelling the surrounding fog. Surprisingly, it was Wally. In the past, Noah and Wally had fought before. Noah Dole, look carefully, this is the power I developed to defeat you. Noah's eyes also flickered slightly and his gaze fell on Wally. The reason was that Kepeshi's entire royal city was enveloped by a huge barrier. Silver Tyrannosaurus Rex. In that battle, Wally used Tyrannosaurus Rex and displayed a power that was not inferior to gods and demon kings. However, although the danger is avoided, the consumption is unavoidable, right? Drake said. Dong. However, since Wally blocked the opponent, I'm happy to do so. Noah smiled. Immediately, Wally began to chant. Klon Kvotch immediately roared to the sky, and his body suddenly expanded, bursting the coat on his body. In the blink of an eye, he turned into a pitch-black dragon, shaking with a terrifying aura. In the sharp sound of breaking through the air, the white meteor streaked across the sky, carrying a whistling force. Under Klon Kvotch's gaze, it swept past Noah's side. At this moment, Klon Kvotch's gaze suddenly froze. Only then did the white meteor stop, revealing its full appearance under the light. It's not just you, partner. White Dragon Emperor is also exploring a new way to use Tyrannosaurus Rex and has succeeded, Drake said solemnly and helplessly. Roar, 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 roar. Whoosh. After all, although Tyrannosaurus Rex did not have the side effects of Tyrannosaurus Rex, the consumption was unavoidable and could only be maintained for a few minutes at most. Through the dream of dawn with infinite destruction, go to Tyrannosaurus. Chapter 1917. Oh. When Noah landed on the open space in front of the main city, a large group of fully armed soldiers rushed out of the buildings in all directions and surrounded Noah. Noah, who had superb sensing ability, had long noticed that there was a very strong vampiric aura in the surrounding buildings, and there were quite a lot of them. However, he did not know whether they were the government or anti-government soldiers of the Sepishi faction, so he did not make a move. However, the vampires that swarmed out of the buildings in all directions did not seem to have such concerns. The leader of the vampires ordered. Are they the fallen angel and demon companions who just came to help King Sepish? Kill him for me. Now, Noah didn't even need to ask to know which side the other party was from. There was no doubt that these vampires were all anti-government soldiers who had uncovered the coup d'état. Oh! Amidst the surging shouts, the vampire soldiers surrounding Noah all raised the weapons in their hands and charged at Noah. A sharp light flashed in Noah's eyes. Just like that, the densely packed vampire soldiers instantly drowned Noah like a human tide. Bang! In the next instant, a surge of divine power exploded from the center of the tide of vampire soldiers, turning into a substantial impact that swept out like a violent storm. Ah! The blood-curdling screams of the vampires resounded. Each and every one of them was sent flying like a piece of trash, crashing into the surrounding buildings and cracking the walls. What? The vampire who had just given the order was shocked. In just a short moment, an entire army of vampires was annihilated? How was this possible? At this moment, a figure dashed in front of the vampire, stretched out his hand, grabbed the vampire's collar, and lifted him up. You did mention the fallen angel and the devil just now, right? Noah looked at the vampire, and his dark eyes flashed with a cold light. Where are they? That vampire seemed to be truly frightened. With trembling lips and trembling hands, he pointed in the direction of the main city. There, a hole was blasted open in the wall. Noah immediately threw the vampire on the ground, then sped up his pace, entered the hole, and entered the castle. Asashel and the Jamanli subordinates seemed to be racing against time. They ignored the vampire army guarding outside and directly entered the castle to cause a ruckus. At the very least, after entering the castle, Noah could see traces of the walls, floor, and ceiling being blasted apart. There were also vampire soldiers lying all over the ground. It was apparent that a huge battle had taken place. Whether these traces of battle were left behind by Asashel and the Jaimonians, or by Seeps's government faction against the anti-government faction, was unknown. Thus, if they followed the traces left behind by the battle, it was very likely that they wouldn't run into Asashel and Zamanli's men in the end. Fortunately, there were still some remnants of the light and mana used in the battle between Asashel and the Jamanli followers in the air. Noah used his extraordinary sensing ability to follow the remnants of the light and mana and rushed in a direction. However, at a certain moment, in the range of Noah's sensing ability, an extremely familiar aura suddenly appeared. Noah's footsteps slowed and he stopped where he was. He closed his eyes and fully activated his sensing ability, feeling that aura over and over again. After a while, Noah seemed to have confirmed something and opened his eyes. Then, Noah's expression became hesitant. To be honest, Noah really wanted to go to the location of that aura. Because, since that aura had appeared, Noah definitely couldn't sit back and do nothing. However, Asashel and the Jamanli followers were also fighting in this castle, and it was very likely that they had already encountered the other evil dragons. Against the legendary evil dragons, Asashel would be fine, but the Jamanli followers would be in danger. However, there shouldn't be any problems, right? After all, Noah could sense that there was still some power in the remnants of the light and mana in the air. That was the power of Black Cat, Luffy, Arthur, Monkey, and Fenrir. At the same time, as Wally's teammates, those with extraordinary backgrounds, also began to move. They were probably with Asashel and the Jamanli followers. With those people, at least the safety of the Jamanli followers would be guaranteed. Thinking of this, Noah turned his gaze to the location of that familiar aura. Since the clone Kua had appeared and blocked Noah's path, it proved that the group of disasters who had obtained the power of the evil dragon wanted the anti-government faction to succeed in their coup d'état and drive out the government's vampires. In other words, the group of disasters was most likely working together with the anti-government faction that started the coup. The previous rulers of the Zepesh faction should not have known about this. The evidence was that the holder of the Holy Grail had become the new king of the Zepesh faction, while the old Zepesh king had begun to flee during the coup. As an indispensable force in reviving the evil dragons, the anti-government faction that supported the holder of the Holy Grail to become the new king of the Zepesh faction was naturally the target of the group of disasters. In other words, the opponents were not only the anti-government faction, but also the evil dragons and members of the group of disasters. And the familiar aura that appeared in the range of Noah's sensing ability was currently an insurmountable trump card of the group of disasters. If Asashel and the Jamanli followers met with Wally's team, even if they were all tied together, only death awaited them. Considering this point, it was better to go over there first. Thus, Noah finally made a decision. He lifted his feet and slowly walked towards the location of that aura. Tap, 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 strong and powerful footsteps were extremely clear in the corridor. Noah looked straight ahead and walked forward without hesitation. As Noah approached, the familiar aura became stronger and stronger. Until a certain moment, Noah finally saw it. In front of him, in the middle of a group of vampires that had fallen on the ground, a petite figure stood there. It was a young girl with an extremely cute face wearing a dark-colored dress. The girl's appearance was only 12 or 13 years old, very young and tender. However, the atmosphere around the young girl had a profound feeling, as if it was a tranquil dark night, intoxicating. That feeling, that appearance, to Noah, was simply too familiar. Because, for more than a month, the original owner of that face had been living under the same roof as Noah, eating together, sleeping together, and even bathing together. How could they not be familiar with each other? Thus, Noah almost subconsciously called out softly. Orpheus, yes. Orpheus. She looked exactly like Orpheus, even the aura was not the slightest bit different. The only difference was that she tied up her waist-length black hair with a hairband, leaving a single ponytail hairstyle. Of course, that petite girl was not Orpheus. Although her appearance and aura were exactly the same as Orpheus, Noah was sure that she was definitely not Orpheus. The reason was simple. The real Orpheus was left at home by Noah, and as usual, he was accompanied by Aster and Athena. If Orpheus had come here, Noah would have known. In that case, who was the petite girl who looked exactly like Orpheus, and even had the same aura as Orpheus? Noah knew. That petite girl was also Orpheus. To be precise, it should be Orpheus' clone. More than a month ago, the heroes had taken half of Orpheus' power. Chow Chow had said that the disaster squad would use half of the power to create a new Orpheus. The girl in front of him was another Orpheus. Another Orpheus created with half of the power of the infinite dragon god. In the next second, she turned her head and looked at Noah. Chapter 1918. When the petite girl's gaze turned to Noah and met with Noah's eyes, the girl's eyes never moved away again. Her behavior was exactly the same as Orpheus when Noah met him before. In addition, the other party's appearance and aura were exactly the same as Orpheus. All of a sudden, Noah seemed to have let down his guard against the girl and relaxed his shoulders. It was also at this moment that the girl suddenly disappeared from where she stood. When she reappeared, she was already in front of Noah. Noah suddenly came back to his senses, but he did not do anything. Instead, he lowered his head and looked at the girl who suddenly appeared in front of him. Immediately, the girl sniffed her cute little nose and moved closer to Noah. She looked like a small animal looking for food, which was abnormally cute. The girl who moved closer to Noah, or even to Noah, sniffed her cute nose, and her voice sounded like clear water droplets. Smell. Although the voice was very pleasant to the ears, it did not have the slightest trace of emotion. Even in this aspect, it was exactly the same as Orpheus. Smell, the girl muttered to herself while sniffing Noah's scent. It has the same smell as Lilith. Lilith? Is that the name of this Orpheus clone? The same smell as Orpheus clone? Is that referring to the smell of Orpheus? Noah thought so while looking at Lilith, who was constantly moving closer to him with no expression on her delicate and cute face, and he was very sure of it. Sure enough, even if it was a clone created by disaster, the girl in front of him was still Orpheus. The dragon god was as pure and innocent as a lotus flower, without any filth or filth. Understanding this, Noah took a deep breath, squatted down, and maintained the same height as Lilith. Their eyes met again. Your name is Lilith, right? Noah looked straight at the petite girl. My name is Noah. Nah, yeah. Lilith tilted her head and repeated. Noah? That's right, Noah. Noah smiled. A family relationship with the other you. Another me? Lilith was stunned for a moment before she stared closely at Noah. The other Lilith? Family? As expected, Lilith knew about Orpheus. However, perhaps because she hadn't been born for a long time, she seemed to be even more ignorant than Orpheus. If Orpheus' mind was at the level of a child, then Lilith's was at the level of a baby. This made Noah even more certain of his thoughts. This child could not continue to stay in the group of disasters and be used by those terrorists. So, Noah said to Lilith, "Do you want to be with your other self?" Lilith was stunned. "With my other self? Lilith?" Lilith tilted her head and kept muttering. "With my other self. Lilith?" "Yes, with your other self." Noah reached out his hand to Lilith. "Be with Orpheus and become my family. Family, together." Lilith sucked on a finger and stared at Noah's hand that was extended to her. Family. Together, looking at Lilith like this, Noah secretly thought that there was a chance. However, an untimely voice suddenly rang out, stirring up a mess. Aya, that won't do. Sister Long is my trump card, I can't lose her here." Accompanied by such a frivolous voice, Lilith, who stared straight at Noah's hand, withdrew her gaze, and her petite body disappeared again, returning to her original position. Noah's face sank fiercely. He slowly stood up, then raised his head and looked ahead. At the end of the corridor, a figure was walking briskly, humming a song like a child who was walking and jumping at the same time. He walked over happily and appeared in front of Noah. Oh, this must be the famous God Slayer, right?" The newcomer said in an extremely frivolous tone as he giggled. "I didn't expect that even the clone Kua couldn't stop the deicide. Fortunately, I didn't run over myself out of curiosity, otherwise, would be dead." Such frivolous words and tone came from the mouth of a middle-aged man. It was a man in his 40s with a head of very eye-catching silver hair. However, compared to the man's hair color, his outfit was more eye-catching. It was the same outfit as Sazek's. However, Sazek's outfit was real red, while the middle-aged man's was silver. As for his appearance, maybe it was Noah's illusion. Noah felt that the man's appearance seemed to be similar to Varley's. Looking at Noah, who was looking directly at him, the middle-aged man raised his eyebrows. "Speaking of which, the deicide still doesn't know who I am, right? In that case, let me introduce myself to the young Godslayer." The middle-aged man pretended to salute in a playful manner. "Uncle's name is Lezavim Levi Lucifer, please enlighten me." "Lucifer?" Noah's eyes narrowed slightly. "Lezavim Levi Lucifer?" Noah had heard of this name before. Lezavim Levi Lucifer. It was recorded in the Bible under the name Laren, the son of the real demon king Lucifer and the mother of demons, Lilith. In other words, Lezavim was the son of the real demon king Lucifer. Lucifer, one of the old 4 demon kings who had passed away, was the biological father of the man in front of him. What did this mean? It meant that Lezavim was Varley's blood relative who had inherited Lucifer's bloodline. That was why Noah felt that Lezavim was a bit similar to Varley. The middle-aged man in front of him was Varley's grandfather. His biological grandfather. Moreover, Noah had heard of such a rumor. In the past, in the era of the old 4 demon kings, there were 3 who were completely different from the other demons. They had extremely powerful abilities, making people wonder if they were special existences of demons. Surpassers. Simply put, they were the mutants of demons. Sarzax Gimenri and Achuka Astaroth were 2 of them. After the death of the 4 demon kings, the 2 of them obtained the demon king position of Lucifer and Beelzebub respectively with powerful abilities that surpassed demons. They were considered legends in the demon realm. The remaining surpasser was the son of the demon king who had inherited Lucifer's bloodline, Lezavim Levi Lucifer. In other words, the man in front of him was also a mutant of demons and had powerful abilities that demons did not have. Varley's grandfather? Noah first glanced at Lilith, who stayed beside Lezavim like a follower, and then looked at him coldly. "I see. You're in charge of the group of disasters now, right? I have no choice. I'm related to the Godslayer." Lezavim spread out his hands. "The old Demon King faction and the Hero faction are finished, right? The rest of the motley crew needs someone to lead them, right?" And Sister Long is like this? She can't be the leader at all, right? So only I, the son of the Demon King, can make everyone love each other? Undoubtedly, he was the son of the former real Demon King and was equivalent to the prince of the demon realm. However, his words and actions gave people the feeling of a clown acting, which was really disgusting. At least, Noah began to wonder if the son of the Demon King in front of him was a surpasser who was as famous as Sarzax and Achuka. However, there was one thing that was certain. The current leader of the group of disasters was the son of Lucifer in front of him. If he directly killed the son of the Demon King here, then the group of disasters would really collapse, right? Lezavim did not know if he had sensed Noah's thoughts, but he laughed very happily. Son of the Godslayer, your eyes are full of murderous intent. It's so scary. Sister Long, quickly come and protect me. With that, Lezavim opened his arms in the direction of Lilith, intending to hug her. However, at this moment, an unprecedented pressure rose from Noah's body. Immediately, Noah's voice sounded. Who allowed you to touch her with your dirty hands? Chapter 1919. The sudden pressure caused the frivolous smile on Lezavim's face to freeze. His movements stiffened, and he couldn't move at all. Lilith, on the other hand, shifted her gaze back to Noah and stared at him. Her eyes, which were as deep as the night, rippled with some ripples. Lezavim could only stop what he was doing and look at Noah. Although his expression wasn't good, his frivolous smile was still there. It seems that our Godslayer really likes Sister Long. By the way, the other Sister Long seems to be on your side. How greedy. I don't deny that I'm greedy, Noah said indifferently. Whether it's Orpheus or Lilith, I'll bring them out of the disaster cluster. Is that so? Lezavim raised his eyebrows and smiled. Oh, why bother? If you want Sister Long, you just have to tell me. It's not like I can't give her to you. But, there's a condition, right? Noah glanced at Lezavim with a mocking expression. That condition, don't tell me it's for me to join the disaster cluster. Well, it seems that our Godslayer doesn't like to stay on my side. Lezavim curled his lips. If that's the case, then I can't give Sister Long to you? You can't give her to me? Noah narrowed his eyes and walked toward Lezavim step by step. Don't tell me that I need your permission for anything I want. What? Don't tell me you want to attack me? Lezavim winked at Zhang Tai. Then I can only call for help. After saying that, Lezavim suddenly snapped his fingers. Clank. Suddenly, a huge teleportation array appeared on the ground behind Lezavim, blooming with dazzling light. The radiance of each magic array was different. However, the auras that rose from within were equally terrifying and powerful. Then, figures of various sizes emerged from within and appeared in this world. Roar, roar, roar! In the next instant, earth-shattering roars resounded from those figures, turning into a sound wave that reverberated in all directions. The mixed roar was like a substantial shockwave that blew away the fallen vampires on the ground and cracked the surrounding walls, ceiling, and ground. It even swept toward Noah's direction, making his robes flutter. Noah's eyes flickered uncontrollably at the sight of the gigantic and normal-sized figures. Then, let me give you a grand introduction. Lezavim opened his arms and spoke loudly like a manipulator of many giant beasts. The one on our left is our Lord Glendale, who once fought the God Slayer himself. Ha 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 ha. Glendale's eyes as he stared at Noah. Human, we meet again. This time, let us have the most tragic battle. It was none other than Glendale, who was once beaten to a pulp by Noah. Next to our Lord Glendale is the guardian of the Golden Apple, who was defeated by the great hero Hercules in Greek mythology. Lezavim pointed to an evil dragon next to Glendale. The evil dragon born by the king of monsters, Typhon Laden. An evil dragon made of wood with multiple heads, which perfectly fit the image of a wood dragon, suddenly looked at Noah with great interest. Is that the legendary God Slayer? I wonder if he can break my barrier and defense? Next to our Ladin is the legendary black dragon that lives in northern Europe. Even if he's killed, he'll be resurrected in the end. He might even survive the twilight of the gods, and he dares to gnaw on the world tree. Lesavim introduced with great interest. The evil dragon that's full of greed and will devour everything in sight. Nidhogg. An evil dragon with black scales and an earthen yellow abdomen that was more than 20 meters long and had 4 limbs and dragon wings also looked at Noah. Disgusting saliva flowed out of the corner of his mouth. Although he's just a human, he looks quite tasty. Next is the most powerful evil dragon. Everyone is afraid of him. Even the gods are afraid of him, Lord Dragon. Lesavim's voice was getting louder and louder. In Egyptian mythology, he's the embodiment of chaos and destruction that tried to engulf the entire world in darkness. Apophis. In front of the 3 gigantic evil dragons, Glendale, Radon, and Nidhogg, a handsome young man with brown skin and priest-like attire lifted his eyes and looked at Noah. The corners of his mouth slowly curled into a smile. I've always wanted to see the legendary God Slayer. Today, my wish is finally fulfilled. Next, there's no need for me to introduce you. The evil dragon lord, who has already met our God Slayer once, has also made his grand entrance. Lesavim shouted as if he was shocked by himself, but in fact, he was very happy. That's the God Slayer from Celtic mythology. He wasn't resurrected by the Holy Grail. He's the dark dragon that's still alive. Clon Kvotch. Yes. Next to Apophis, Clon Kovac appeared. His coat was gone, and his upper body was bare. His eyes, one gold and one black, turned to Noah, and a smile appeared on his face. I've fought the White Dragon Emperor, but he's still no match for me. That's why I've come to find you. Just as Noah expected, even if Varley developed the Tyrannosaurus without any side effects, he still couldn't defeat Clon Kvotch, who had reached the level of a sky dragon. Under such circumstances, the smile on Lesavim's face grew wider and wider. Behind him, an evil dragon that was smaller than Glendale, Radon, and Nidhogg, but it had 3 heads. Its skin was pitch black, its eyes were crimson red, and it had a pair of dragon wings on its back. It was an evil dragon that was smaller than Glendale, Radon, and Nidhogg. This evil dragon lord is very obvious, so obvious that I don't need to introduce him. The deicide should know him, right? Lesavim grinned. He's as famous as our Clon Kvotch and Apophis. Together, they're known as the strongest evil dragon. He's the infamous evil dragon in the sect of fire Dahaka. Under Lesavim's call, the 3-headed demonic dragon laughed ferociously. Huh. So this is the God Slayer? It doesn't feel any different from other humans? No different. No different. Dahaka's 3 heads seemed to have their own thoughts. They spoke separately, giving off a rather strange feeling. In addition, its skin was an ominous pitch-black color, not the pure white color that Noah had imagined. The 3-headed demonic dragon in front of him was completely different from the 3-headed demonic dragon that Noah had encountered in the box. How is it? How is it? Lesavim smiled cheerfully as if he was anticipating Noah's shock and fear. Uncle, my lineup of helpers is luxurious enough, right? Great evil dragon lord's great discount. Dark dragon of the new moon, Clon Kvotch. Forbidden dragon of the mana source, Dahaka. The primordial dark nether dragon, Apophis. The Tyrannosaurus of great sin, Grendel. Guardian dragon of the treasured tree, Ladin. Dead dragon of the law, Nidhogg. Almost all of the legendary evil dragons of various mythological systems were present. This frighteningly powerful lineup surrounded Lesavim, and their gazes were all focused on Noah. Waves of terrifying auras rose from the evil dragons one after another, and as if gravity had materialized, they fiercely suppressed the entire space. Chapter 1920. Roar, 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 earth-shattering roars came from the mouths of the evil dragons. When they mixed together, it vaguely felt like the roars of 10,000 beasts, which was very shocking. Looking at the happy Lezivim, the expressionless Lilith, and the roaring evil dragons, Noah had to admit that this lineup was really quite amazing. Lezivim was the son of the demon king who shared the title of Surpasser with Sazax and Achuka. Lilith was half of Orpheus and had half of Orpheus' power. Although the dragon gods, infinite, had become limited because of the division of power, resulting in a drop in strength that was far more than half, even so, Orpheus still exceeded 4 digits and was between 3 and 4 digits. He was much more powerful than the other top 10 existences in the world. Presumably, Lilith was the same, right? As for those evil dragons, they were existences that turned the world upside down in their respective myths and legends. Glendale, Radon, and Nidhogg were definitely Dragon King level evil dragons, which were stronger than the average Demon King level evil dragons. Even Azazel was not confident of winning against them. Azazel, Dahaka, and Apophis were even more so. They were as famous as Clone Kuva and were known as the strongest evil dragons. They were only below the heavenly dragon level and were comparable to gods. As for Clone Kuva, he had surpassed himself and reached the heavenly dragon level through continuous training. Even Wally, who had developed the Tyrannosaurus Rex, was defeated in a head-on confrontation. With such a lineup, not to mention dealing with one person, it was definitely enough to deal with a mythical force. It was believed that even a top 10 powerhouse in the world would not be able to survive against such a lineup. Although Noah was ranked second among the top 10 powerhouses in the world, with his current strength, he could not face such a terrifying lineup alone. Without the use of another cosmology, the star map of creation, another cosmology. Therefore, looking at the shocking lineup, Noah suddenly laughed. Good. Very good. Noah's voice echoed very clearly in the surroundings. Since all of you are here, that's great. As soon as he finished speaking. Clang. A burst of bright starlight burst out from Noah's body. As long as I get rid of all of you, I'll be done once and for all. As Noah's voice rang out and the resplendent starlight surged, waves of berserk power gushed into Noah's body like streams of turbulence. Buzz. Suddenly, the aura on Noah's body gradually swelled. With a shocking momentum, it soared crazily. In the blink of an eye, it was above everyone else. All of the evil dragons present abruptly stopped breathing, and their roars came to an abrupt halt. Even the expressionless Lilith couldn't help but widen her eyes slightly, and her petite body subconsciously tensed up. On the other hand, Lezivim stared closely at Noah, who was bursting with a terrifying aura like a demon god. The smile on his face gradually disappeared, and a frightening look flashed across his eyes. So that's how it is. So this is the almost invincible, another cosmology, that can imitate any object other than humans and absorb the opponent's power for its own use. Although it's a bit strange for me to say it, it's indeed a foul power. It's so foul that it makes people want to curse their mothers. Lezivim laughed again. However, I'm not unprepared. After saying that, Lezivim raised his hand. On that hand, a cup with a golden luster floated in mid-air, emitting an unusually dense holy aura. That's... Noah was stunned, and then his face sank. That's the Sephiroth's cup. That's right. Lezivim laughed frivolously. Uncle, I took this holy cup out of the original owner's body. How about it? Are you surprised? More than a month ago, after Noah revealed his true trump card, his another cosmology was no longer a secret. In that case, it was impossible for Lezivim not to prepare a countermeasure. With the holy cup, even if the evil dragon lords are killed, I can continue to revive them. If you keep killing, I'll keep reviving. In that case, even if we can't win, we won't lose, right? Lezivim said with a smile. At that time, the God Slayer and the evil dragon lords will be able to fight until the end of the world. They will destroy this castle, this city, and even this vampire kingdom. How many vampires will be sacrificed at that time? 10? 100? 1,000? Or all of them will die? Lezivim clapped his hands and cheered. Just thinking about it makes one's blood boil. The bright starlight and violent aura that rose from Noah's body suddenly froze. Is this your goal? Noah looked at Lezivim, his eyes flashing with coldness and anger. Using the entire vampire world as a hostage? I can't help it. The God Slayer is so scary that even the various mythological forces are afraid of you. Since I want to go against you, I have to use a little trick. Lezivim grinned. But, I have the demeanor of a bad guy, right? That's not bad, right? Who asked me to be a bad demon? Lala, at this moment, Noah really felt that his limits were being challenged. Originally, he thought that with his current state of mind, no matter how others provoked him, he wouldn't be easily angered and fall into the trap of others. But Lezivim was like the crystallization of malice. It was as if he existed specifically to challenge other people's bottom line. It really made people angry. This guy was a bastard. Noah clearly understood this point. At this moment, Lezivim suddenly changed the topic. How about this, God Slayer? You don't use that, another cosmology, and I won't use the Sephiroth's cup. Let's have a good fight, how about that? Hearing this, Noah was stunned. Then, he understood something and laughed sarcastically. No wonder you used so much nonsense to pave the way. So that's the reason. Noah raised his head and cast his gaze on the evil dragons that were looking at him with violent and aggressive eyes. He sneered as if he was talking to himself. No matter how well prepared you are, these legendary-level evil dragons are known for being dangerous and uncontrollable. They all want to have a good fight with me, so it's possible that they aren't under your control. That's why you're using such a clumsy method to limit my power and satisfy them, right? The smile on Lezivim's face froze again. Obviously, Noah's guess was right. To Lezivim, Noah's another cosmology was a huge threat. However, to these evil dragons, it would only arouse their fighting spirit. However, against Noah who used the another cosmology, these evil dragons would lose no matter how strong they were. Therefore, to prevent the evil dragons from losing control and challenging Noah, which would lead to another great defeat for the Disaster Squad, Lezivim could only use this method to limit Noah's power. This way, both sides would not have to use their trump cards, and it would satisfy the evil dragon's fighting spirit. Why not? As for losing? As long as Noah did not use the another cosmology, with such a lineup, how could the Disaster Squad lose? That was indeed the case. However, Lezivim had miscalculated something. All right. I agree to your conditions. Noah's gaze swept across the evil dragons, and the corners of his mouth slowly rose. But, who is my opponent? Don't tell me you're all planning to come at me together? Lord Evil Dragons? With that one sentence, the atmosphere of the scene changed completely. Chapter 1921. If he wanted to go against Noah, he had to at least find a way to deal with his another cosmology. Although this idea was simple, it was the most correct one. If he did not find a way to deal with Noah's another cosmology, then other than humans, no matter how many other beings came, they would not be able to win against Noah. However, how could the so-called another cosmology be so easy to deal with? It was a power that was above the 3 digits of the box court and was equal to the 2 digits. If this kind of power was so easy to deal with, then Az Dakaha, who had transformed into a human in the final trial, would not have been a threat to the entire box court. Even the War God Council had to collectively descend from the heavens to become a human and drop their own spiritual level to put a seal on his shoulders and head. Since strength alone could not deal with it, then Lezivim could only think of a way to deal with Noah. The only way to make Noah hesitate and not use the another cosmology was to make it so that Noah wouldn't attack Noah for fear of breaking the vases. In view of this, Lezivim used the Holy Grail as a condition and the entire vampire kingdom as a hostage to force Noah to give up on using the another cosmology. Unfortunately, although Lezivim was thinking of ways to deal with Noah, he forgot that there were many uncertainties in his own camp. The uncontrollable evil dragons were one thing, but their self-esteem was another. Lezivim had obviously forgotten. For these extremely dangerous and extremely battle-thirsty evil dragons, was it possible for them to join forces to deal with a human? The answer was naturally no. Are you kidding me? Glendale was the first to speak. How can we attack together? I'll go alone. I personally agree that we can't attack together, Radon retorted in a flat tone. But, you've already fought with the God Slayer, so it should be me next. Who would give it to you? Nidhogg was drooling as he roared crazily. That's my food, no one is allowed to take it from me. That should have been my line. Azzy-Dahaka exclaimed. That's my prey. I'll tear anyone who dares to snatch it from me. Tear him apart. Tear him apart. The other two heads of Azzy-Dahaka also shouted. Their words sounded like a child's nonsense, but it gave off an extremely dangerous feeling, as if he could really do it. Under such circumstances, Crone Kovac frowned and said, I also want to fight the current Red Dragon Emperor. But, just like Glendale, you've fought him before, right? Apahis smiled. Since that's the case, I can't give it to you. Hearing this, Clon Kuvaka's frown deepened. I still have a debt to settle with that human. Glendale looked at the surrounding evil dragons, and a dangerous glint appeared in his eyes. Are you trying to stop me? What? Do you want to fight? Layden laughed in a low voice. Have you thought it through? You, who are good at attacking, and I, who are good at defending, have very poor compatibility, right? You can't beat me, can you? I'm best at eating. Nidhogg raised his head and bared his teeth as he spoke. Whoever dares to snatch food from me, be prepared to be eaten by me first. So you're saying that the evil dragons have to fight to determine the winner? Azzy-Dahaka pursed his lips. That's not bad, although you're not my match. We're not your match. We're not your match. Azzy-Dahaka's other two heads were simply adding insult to injury, and it angered Glendale, Layden, and Nidhogg. However, it had to be said that Azzy-Dahaka's words were correct. In terms of strength, as one of the strongest evil dragons, Azzy-Dahaka was only below the Sky Dragon. He was far stronger than Glendale, Layden, and Nidhogg. Clon Kovac and Apophis, on the other hand, laughed. If the winner can fight the Red Dragon Emperor, then I don't mind. I can also play along and leave the God Slayer for last. It's not bad to deal with the competition around me first. As expected, although they looked very rational, Crone Kovac and Apophis were both evil dragons and were very dangerous. All right. Glendale was so angry that he laughed. If that's the case, then let's fight first. The winner can fight that human. Glendale's disregard for the difference in strength caused the atmosphere among the evil dragons to turn frightening. Wait. What's the situation now? Lezavim reacted and hurriedly spoke. I say, evil dragon lords, why do you have to fight amongst yourselves now of all times? What's wrong? Prince? Layden glanced at Lezavim. Do you want to interfere? I advise you not to interfere. Nidhogg stuck out his tongue and licked the corner of his mouth. I haven't tasted the Demon King's son, so don't force me to eat you. Such an arrogant statement made Lezawim's expression turn ugly, but he still smiled apologetically. Since one of you is fighting, all of you are fighting. Why don't you all come at me together? Why don't you all fight first? Hearing Lezawim's words, the surrounding air turned chilly. The evil dragons immediately looked at Lezavim with pity in their eyes. As expected, you're just the Demon King's son in the end? Apophis said calmly. You don't even know the most basic honor and self-respect. No wonder the demon realm is now ruled by the two surpassers, Sarzax Gimli and Achuka Astalot, and not you, the demon prince of planet Chiming. The evil dragon's pitiful gazes and Apophis's disdain made Lezavim's expression contort. Who cares so much about you? Lezavim roared furiously and raised the Holy Grail floating above his palm. Your lives are now in my hands. You were all revived by the Holy Grail. If I stop the Holy Grail, you will all die. Do you want to die? All of the evil dragons fell silent upon hearing this. TSK. As Dahaka clicked his tongue, as if he had completely lost interest. I thought I could have a good fight with the God Slayer, but it turned out like this. Boring. Forget it, go and play by yourselves. I won't keep you company. I won't keep you company. I won't keep you company. After saying that, as Dahaka activated a teleportation formation below him and left without hesitation. Lezavim was dumbfounded. He left? He left just like that? What was this? While Lezavim was still in a daze, Apahis spoke in an equally cold tone. I won't keep you company either. You can fight among yourselves. A similar teleportation array appeared beneath Apahis, and he disappeared without a trace. Wait. Lezavim's eyes widened. Then, Klon Kovac also turned around. I won't be restrained by the Holy Grail. I'm only moving with you to fight against the strong. Since you can't satisfy me, I'll act on my own from now on. After saying that, Klon Kovacs disappeared. One of the strongest evil dragons had left Lezavim's camp. As for the remaining 3 evil dragons, they were even more direct. Didn't you want to fight with him? I'll let you have him. Glendale, I hope you can win, Your Highness. Radon, you made me lose my appetite. Fortunately, there's still half of that giant monster left. It's just enough to fill my stomach. Nidhogg, after saying that, Glendale, Radon, and Nidhogg disappeared in a flash of light from the teleportation formation. You bastards. Lezavim finally came back to his senses and cursed out loud in rage. Who gave you permission to leave? All of you, return. Before he could finish his sentence, a flash of light pierced through the space and swept past Lezavim's body. Splat. Along with a tearing sound, an arm was thrown into the air with crimson blood spurting out. The smell of blood filled the air. Chapter 1922. Poochie. When the tearing sound was clearly heard in the space, thick blood splattered everywhere, and an arm flew into the air before falling to the ground. Lezavim was completely stunned. Looking at the familiar arm that fell in front of him, Lezavim seemed to have lost his soul. He turned his head blankly and looked in the direction of his arm. However, the arm was long gone. Crimson blood continuously flowed out from the cut and dyed Lezavim's body red. Lezavim finally understood. His arm had been cut off. At the same time, an unimaginable pain struck Lezavim's mind. Lezavim's face twisted. Gawa dash. In the next moment, a series of painful screams resounded in this space. F***CK. 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 Lezavim held his broken arm and screamed. He raised his head hysterically and stared ahead with his bloodshot eyes. There, Noah slowly retracted his arm that fluctuated with rich divine power and laughed. Is this all you've got after losing your helper? There was sarcasm and disappointment in the laughter. The sarcasm was, of course, directed at Lezavim's unbearable performance. The disappointment was also directed at Lezavim's performance. Disregarding his personality, in terms of strength alone, this guy could not be compared to Sazax and Achuka. Sazax and Achuka, these 2 surpassers, were powerful enough to enter the top 10 in the world. As for Lezavim, although he was also a surpasser and his strength had surpassed the average Demon King level, he was at most on the same level as Michael and Asashel. He was probably on par with Chow Chow. Even if he could enter the 4 digits, he would only be at the bottom and could not be compared to Sazax and Achuka. With Noah's current strength, not to mention another cosmology, even if he did not use divine artifacts and elven devices, he had a high chance of defeating Lezavim. For a surpasser who was as famous as Sazax and Achuka, this level was too low. Just like what Apophis said, it was no wonder that Sazax and Achuka were the rulers of the demon realm. It was not only because Lezavim did not have the personality and state of mind of Sazax and Achuka, but also because Lezavim did not have the terrifying strength of Sazax and Achuka. Also, you've overestimated yourself. Noah lifted his feet and walked toward Lezavim step by step. Not only did you revive a legendary evil dragon to replenish your combat power, but you even tried to use the Holy Grail to control the evil dragons? Those evil dragons are dangerous existences that even their respective mythical organizations, and they are even willing to destroy them. You, as the son of a demon king, you want to control of so many evil dragons? You're overestimating yourself. Noah slowly raised a hand. Didn't you tell me not to use another cosmology? Then you'll die like this. As soon as his voice fell, thick spears of light suddenly flashed around Noah, turned into flashes of light, and shot toward Lezavim like a storm. Lilith. Lezavim's expression changed drastically, and he shouted without thinking. Hurry up and protect me. Just as the rain of light spears was about to land on Lezavim's body, a petite figure appeared in front of him and extended a hand towards the thick light spears that were shooting towards him. Hum. A wave of power reverberated from the petite hand, and like ripples in a lake, it swept through the spears of light. Under the power wave, the spears of light that were shooting out like a storm suddenly stopped in mid-air, and then suddenly dissipated without any warning, disappearing without a trace. Lezavim. Protect. Lilith withdrew her hand and stood in front of Lezavim. Protect. Lezavim, that's right, protect me. Lezavim breathed a sigh of relief and nodded repeatedly. Just protect me. As expected of the dragon sister that I regard as my trump card, you're awesome. Hearing Lezavim's vulgar and unbearable speech, Noah frowned deeply and turned his gaze to Lilith. That person is not worthy of your protection. Noah stared at Lilith and said word by word. Come to me, Lilith, this is where you should be. Lilith blinked and suddenly hesitated. F***CK. What are you hesitating for? Lezavim said in exasperation. Don't hesitate. It's your job to protect me. It's the meaning of your birth. If you don't protect me, then there's no need for you to exist. Protect. Job. Meaning. Lilith's young and pretty face returned to its original state as if all emotions were erased. Lilith. Protect Lezavim. That's my job, is it? Noah closed his eyes. When he opened them again, his eyes were filled with an extremely cold calmness. In that case, even if I have to use force, I'll make you leave that lowly demon king's son. The divine power circulating in Noah's body suddenly transformed into magic power. Clang! A burst of brilliant white light bloomed from Noah's body. Like a tide, it surged to the surroundings, covering everything in the surroundings. Clang! In the royal city of Capes, in a corner of a castle, a flash suddenly penetrated the wall and bloomed from it. Bang! Accompanied by a muffled explosion, the wall covered by the brilliant white light exploded, turning into pieces of equal squares. Under the impact, it exploded in all directions like a bullet fired from a gun. Among them, Lilith's body was shrouded in a black crystal-like protective shield. While protecting Lezavim, she retreated from the brilliant flash and rushed into the sky. That bastard god slayer, he actually dared to do it? Lezavim's face was distorted. Obviously, he was extremely angry. However, Lezavim also knew how terrifying Noah was if they really fought. Even the mythical forces didn't dare to go against him. What could Lezavim, a little demon king's son, do? If it weren't for Lilith here, Lezavim was afraid that he would have run away in terror. If you force me into a corner, I'll slaughter the entire vampire territory. Lezavim cursed and immediately took out the Holy Grail. Above the Holy Grail, bursts of sacred waves spread and shrouded Lezavim. His face that had turned pale due to the loss of blood from his broken arm gradually recovered its rosy color. Meanwhile, Lezavim's severed arms suddenly wriggled, and at a speed visible to the naked eye, flesh and blood rapidly grew out. It didn't take long for Lezavim's arm to recover. Boom! But at the same time, in the castle below, the sound of the ground being stepped on heavily resounded. Whoosh! A figure soared into the sky at an astonishing speed, like a rocket, and shot towards Lezivim's direction. Protect. Lezivim. Lilith immediately stretched out one of her hands toward the figure that was shooting toward her. A terrifying power fluctuated in her hand. However, a burst of bright starlight flickered in the space. Under the illumination of the starlight, the power fluctuating in Lilith's hand gradually melted like white snow. Lilith was stunned. You! Lezivim yelled out. Didn't you say that you won't use another cosmology? As soon as Lezivim's voice fell, a sneer entered his ears. That's on the condition that you won't use the Holy Grail. But didn't you use the Holy Grail? The figure that rose into the sky rushed in front of Lezivim. Of course, you're not worthy of me using another cosmology. I'm using it to deal with Lilith. To deal with trash like you, a fist is enough. The fist whistled through the air and imprinted itself into Lezivim's eyes that were filled with horror. Chapter 1923. Dong. In the sky above the royal city, a muffled sound rang out like a clap of thunder. It even turned into an echo that rippled through the entire sky. Whoosh! A figure immediately fell like a falling meteorite, rubbing against the air as it shot down with a sharp piercing sound. After which, it heavily landed on a building. Bang! The powerful impact caused the rather magnificent building to explode as if it was hit by a cannonball, stirring up gravel and debris all over the sky. As for the falling figure, it was completely covered by a large pile of gravel and debris, and the figure could no longer be seen. Lezivim. Lilith witnessed this scene with her own eyes, and a dazed and confused expression appeared on her young and pretty face. Protect. Lezivim, if Lilith still had strength now, she should immediately rush to the side of the target to protect, right? However, at this moment, a layer of bright starlight had been shrouding Lilith's body, constantly offsetting the power fluctuating from Lilith's body, causing Lilith to almost lose the most basic flight ability. Under such circumstances, Lilith couldn't use her strength at all, so her expression was so dazed and confused. However, at this moment when Lilith was at a loss and confused, a hand quietly stretched out and embraced her. I'm sorry, Lilith. Please behave yourself for the time being. With Lilith in his arms, Noah lowered his gaze and looked at the shattered and collapsed building below. After this is over, I'll take you to see the other you. The other Lilith, the other Lilith. Lilith raised her small head, looked at Noah, and finally quieted down after muttering a few times. Noah breathed a sigh of relief. No matter what, at least he had to deal with Lilith first. This little girl who is more ignorant and innocent than Orpheus, if she continues to follow a bastard like Lezivim, no matter who it is, they will go crazy, right? Fortunately, Lilith didn't seem to be controlled by Lezivim. She was just like Orpheus in the past, being used in a state of ignorance. So, as long as he got her back, everything would be fine. Of course, Lilith was the half-body of the dragon god created by Lezivim with half of Orpheus' power. No one knew if that despicable guy, Lezivim, would leave any backup plan on Lilith. With this in mind, Noah fully activated the power of Avesta, and let the power of another cosmology directly wrap around Lilith, constantly offsetting Lilith's power. In this way, even if Lezivim left any backup plan on Lilith, without power, it couldn't be used. Although Noah could not use the power of another cosmology on other objects because of the activation effect, in this situation, Noah could not use the power of another cosmology on other objects. However, if the opponent was Lezivim, as mentioned earlier, it wouldn't be a big deal even if he didn't use another cosmology. Compared to Lezivim, Lilith's power, Lilith, bang. At this time, in the center of the ruins below, 12 huge black pillars suddenly sprang out. Like a windmill, they stirred up the surrounding rubble, causing a violent shock wave, causing the area that was filled with rubble to be cleared in an instant. In the center of the 12 huge black pillars, Lezivim, who was covered in blood, stood up shakily, letting the 12 huge black pillars stretch out and retract behind him. The bodies of the 12 huge black pillars were 12 pitch black wings. Like bats, they only belonged to demons. The Jumanli's dependents also had such wings. They were just like the white wings of angels and the black wings of fallen angels. They were characteristics that only belonged to demons. However, among the Jumanli's dependents, even Lyath, who came from a pure-blooded demon family, only had one pair of wings. As for Lezavim, he was like Asashel and Michael. He had 6 pairs of 12 wings, which meant that he had reached the highest level of demons. From this point of view, Lezavim's noble bloodline that he directly inherited from Lucifer did not go to waste. It was a pity that this son of the demon king, who was the noblest existence in the demon realm, was in a sorry state at this moment. Even if he spread out his 12 wings, he still could not change anything. Clang! The Holy Grail floating around him released holy waves, constantly repairing Lezavim's injured body. As a divine tool that could subvert the principle of life and even resurrect completely destroyed existences, the ability to heal was just a side effect. In the blink of an eye, the wounds on Lezavim's body were completely healed. TSK. Noah could not help but be speechless. Should I really deal with that Holy Grail first? However, Noah was still a little hesitant about making a move on the Holy Grail. Because the Holy Grail was not a divine tool that belonged to Lezavim, but it was taken out by Lezavim from the original owner. Taking out the divine tool from the original owner was a technology developed by the fallen angel faction led by Asashel. It was no longer a secret now. However, if the divine tool was taken out, the original owner would die. However, if the divine tool could be put back into the owner's body, then the owner might be able to be resurrected. If the Holy Grail was destroyed, then the owner of the Holy Grail would really die. Of course, the original owner of the Holy Grail was not related to Noah, so Noah did not have to worry at all. But looking at Gasper's reaction to the owner of the Holy Grail before, Noah was sure that if that person really died, then Gasper would probably be in so much pain that he would rather die. Moreover, the divine tool was originally just a kind of power. Even if it was destroyed, it could be repaired. In that case, I can only snatch it. Just as Noah planned to do so and was about to rush in the direction of Lezavim, there was a sudden change. Whang! A huge burst of magic power turned into a whirlwind-like impact. It suddenly rushed from a distance and swept in the direction of Noah. Noah's figure suddenly paused, and he turned around directly. Facing the violent manna that was sweeping towards him, he extended one of his hands, and a brilliant white light flickered on it. Bang! As soon as the violent magic power that swept in like a whirlwind fell on Noah's hand, it immediately exploded under the effect of magic crush. At the same time, a figure suddenly flashed beside Lezavim. Your Highness Lezavim. Euclid helped Lezavim up. Are you okay? Do I look okay to you? Lezavim pushed Euclid away violently and looked at Noah with a twisted face. Damn God Slayer. Your Highness Lezavim, it seems that we have slightly underestimated the God Slayer. Euclid said in a deep voice. Even all the mythical forces can't do anything to him. It's not enough to deal with him with just this level of preparation. Anyway, the most important thing is the Holy Grail. Let's retreat first. Lezavim suddenly glared at Euclid. Euclid stepped forward without fear, and said this sentence. If we fail here, then everything we've done before will be for naught. Does that not matter? Lezavim's expression suddenly changed. He looked up and saw Lilith in Noah's arms in midair. Lezavim gritted his teeth with hatred. Let's go. Go? Noah's eyes flashed with a touch of sharpness. Do you think you can leave? Lezavim was suddenly anxious. Euclid, on the other hand, smiled faintly. Lord Noah, instead of wasting your time here, why don't you hurry and take a look outside? Maybe we can save the vampire kingdom? Save? Noah was stunned. Taking advantage of this time, Euclid activated a teleportation magic array and enveloped himself and Lezavim. Remember this. God Slayer. Lezavim stared at Noah. One day, I'll make you pay for what you've done. Lezavim and Euclid left this sentence and disappeared into the teleportation magic array. Noah's eyes flashed. After a while, he took a deep breath, turned around, and rushed out of the Opesh royal city. Chapter 1924. When Noah flew out of Opesh royal city and arrived in mid-air above the vampire city, the scene that appeared in front of him made his expression change. Roar, roar, roar. He saw huge black shadows flying back and forth in the sky above the vampire city, letting out deafening roars. The main body of the black shadows was a giant dragon that had a pitch-black luster. The giant dragon was filled with an evil and ominous aura, and there was no rationality in its eyes. It was completely engulfed by madness and ferocity. One after another, these pitch-black dragons appeared from all directions. As they circled in the air, they raised their heads and roared. Then, they spat out scorching flames at the city below. Boom, 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 boom. Accompanied by a series of explosions, the buildings were destroyed by the flames that fell from the sky one after another. They were all set ablaze and turned into ruins in an instant. Dragons. The dragons are here. Run. In the city, the residents of the vampires rushed out of the buildings one after another. They screamed in panic and fled in panic, falling into an unprecedented chaos. Under such circumstances, the pitch-black giant dragon spewed scorching flames at the city below mercilessly, destroying the buildings one by one. It was as if they were the embodiment of destruction and destruction. In the blink of an eye, the entire city turned into a sea of fire. The beautiful snowy scene from before disappeared without a trace under the ravaging of the pitch-black dragons. What's going on? Noah exclaimed in shock. What's going on? Noah wasn't shocked that the vampire city was suffering a disaster. What truly shocked Noah was the huge number of pitch-black dragons. Are those all evil dragons? Noah couldn't believe it. Since when were there so many evil dragons? Compared to the legendary evil dragons like Glendale, Radon, and Nidhogg, the aura of these evil dragons was unbelievably weak, let alone the strongest evil dragons like Clon Kuak, Az Dahaka, and Apophis. However, even if they could not compare to the legendary evil dragons, each of these evil dragons had the strength of an intermediate evil demon. To Noah, this level of power was not much different from nothing, but there were too many of them. Therefore, even though the people living in the city were not normal humans, but vampires, they could only flee in panic under the onslaught of the evil dragons. However, the vampires could not escape the city at all. This was because there was a crystal-like barrier surrounding the city, preventing all vampires and evil dragons from leaving. If this continued, not only would the vampire city be destroyed, but all the vampires here would also die from the evil dragon's breath. At that time, the number of casualties could not be described as heavy. Just as Noah was feeling shocked and puzzled, a figure shot over from afar. Noah immediately looked over and recognized the newcomer. The newcomer was none other than a Sashal. With 12 pitch-black wings on his back, a Sashal flew over from a direction and arrived in front of Noah. "You've finally appeared." A Sashal grabbed Noah's hand and said hurriedly. "Quick. Use the power of your another cosmology to cancel out that barrier. Otherwise, the vampires won't be able to escape. The Jimenez's followers won't be able to go to the Camilla faction to help." With this short sentence, Noah understood. It was not only Cape's side, but even Camilla's side had been attacked by the evil dragons. A barrier? Noah raised his head and looked at the crystal-like barrier in the sky. Is this the evil dragon Radon's doing? Other than the evil dragon who once guarded the golden apple in Greek mythology and was extremely good at barriers and defense, who else could create a barrier that even a Sashal could not do anything about? That barrier was not only to prevent the vampires from escaping, but also to prevent the people here from assisting the Camilla faction. It was also set up to make the evil dragon stay here obediently and wreak havoc. That's why it was set up, isn't it? At that moment, Noah raised his hand towards the barrier in the sky. However, he did not use the another cosmology to cancel it out like a Sashal said. Instead, he activated a huge magic array. Immediately after, Noah poured all of the shatter magic into the magic array, causing the magic array to suddenly flash with a dazzling white light and illuminate the surroundings. The next moment, a shatter light beam shot up into the sky and violently shot towards the horizon. Bang dash. Following the sound of glass shattering, the shatter light beam that landed heavily on the crystal-like barrier suddenly penetrated it. Kacha. Kacha kacha. Immediately, the barrier began to crack. In an instant, the entire barrier was filled with cracks. Bang dash. In the next second, the barrier was completely shattered in the midst of an explosion and disappeared into the sky. Great! Asashel was overjoyed and quickly activated a communication magic array and spoke into it. Leah, take your kin and go help the Camilla faction. Got it. Leah's voice sounded from the communication magic array and then disappeared. What's going on? Noah asked at that moment. Why are there so many evil dragons? Those evil dragons have just appeared. Asashel gritted his teeth and spoke with resentment. Not long ago, they were all vampires from the anti-government faction of Seeps. Vampires from the anti-government faction of Seeps. Noah was stunned at first, but then he understood. Were they transformed by the Holy Grail? The anti-government faction of Seeps was in cahoots with the Disaster faction and shared the power of the Holy Grail. They were vampires who tried to use the Holy Grail to become flawless creatures. Chapter 1925. Clang. The dazzling brilliance was like a rising star at dawn. It flickered in the sky above the city that had turned into a sea of fire, illuminating the sky that was still filled with fog. What? Asashel, who was the closest to the light source, was caught off guard by the dazzling brilliance. He was shocked and hurriedly raised a hand in front of him to block the dazzling brilliance. However, Asashel sensed a terrifyingly powerful mana rising amidst the dazzling brilliance. Immediately after, the brilliance, which was mixed with a shocking amount of mana, rushed into the sky and into the clouds. Ding dong. With a strange sound that was like the sound of a bell, an extremely exquisite and huge magic array suddenly appeared in the sky. It emitted a dazzling brilliance that illuminated the entire sky. The evil dragons that were wreaking havoc in the vampire city finally noticed the commotion. They were all attracted by it and looked in Noah's direction. However, it was too late to react. Under the exquisite and huge magic array in the sky, Noah's body was bathed in the dazzling brilliance. He clasped his hands together and a small magic array appeared in his deep, dark eyes. The fairy law. Activate. The sound of judgment that shook the space turned into an echo that reverberated in the world. Hum. Suddenly, the dazzling brilliance turned into a surging wave that spread in all directions with Noah as the center. The evil dragons did not even have time to react before they were all engulfed by the dazzling brilliance and disappeared in the surging brilliance. Hum. The dazzling brilliance enveloped the rampaging evil dragons, the escaping vampires, and the burning city. At this moment, even the people on Camilla's side could clearly see the dazzling brilliance shining in Seep City. They were all captivated by it. After an unknown amount of time, the dazzling brilliance dimmed bit by bit. Sensing that the shocking magic power that was vibrating in the space was slowly dissipating, Asashel opened his eyes with lingering fear. However, as soon as he opened his eyes, the scene that appeared in front of him left him stunned. He saw that the evil dragons that were wreaking havoc in the vampire city that had turned into a sea of fire were lying all over the ground. The huge number of evil dragons had all collapsed in the time it took for Asashel to close his eyes and open them again. The vampires who were still running for their lives opened their eyes in horror. When they saw the evil dragons lying on the ground, they were all stunned and looked at each other in bewilderment. The entire place suddenly fell silent. Only the sound of flames burning was left. It was unusually strange. Only then did Noah let out a breath and turned his head to look at Asashel. All right, give her to me. Oh. Asashel responded as if he had lost his train of thought. He subconsciously passed Lilith to Noah, and then he realized what was going on, and his eyes widened. What? What was that just now? Magic? That's right. Noah nodded as he hugged Lilith, who had been quiet all this while. I didn't expect the magic that I had sealed away for a long time to come in handy at this time. The 3 super spells from the fairy tale had indeed been sealed away by Noah for a long time. That was because the 3 super spells had gradually become useless in Noah's hands. It was not that the 3 super spells were not powerful enough. On the contrary, with the support of Noah's endless mana, the power of the 3 super spells could be said to be astonishingly powerful. Unfortunately, the 3 super spells had a rather fatal flaw. That was, each of them required a certain amount of time to prepare. During that period of time, as Noah's power improved, they became more and more deadly. After all, the stronger Noah's power was, the higher the level of the battle he would be facing. It was often unknown how many rounds could be exchanged in a second in a high-level battle. Using a super spell that required such a long time to prepare was simply an act of suicide. Because of this reason, Makarov and Laxus, who also knew how to use the fairy law, would almost never use this super trial spell in high-level battles unless they had the confidence to kill in one shot and had sufficient time to prepare. Even Makarov and Laxus were like this, let alone Noah. Of course, Makarov and Laxus would not use the fairy law easily. That was also because once this super spell was used, regardless of whether it was successful or not, it would consume a large amount of mana. Of course, Noah did not have this problem, but his fighting ability was much stronger than Makarov and Laxus. The preparation time of the 3 super spells could be said to be a fatal flaw in his hands. In addition, other than the fairy law, the other 2 super spells also had other fatal flaws. The fairy glitter, a super killing spell, sometimes could not be used in other worlds because of the different positions of the sun, moon, and stars and the situation. Fairy sphere was an absolute defense spell that required a guild member's thoughts to gather its power. In other worlds where there were no guild members, it wouldn't be able to even freeze time. At most, it would be able to form a sturdy protective barrier. Coupled with the unavoidable extremely long preparation time, after becoming a god slayer, the 3 super spells were sealed by Noah and could no longer be used. However, while it was not good enough, it was better than bad. Leaving aside the fairy glitter and the fairy sphere, the fairy law was still very useful when it came to mowing the grass. It was just right to use it in such a situation. Don't worry, I only shook their minds. I did not directly destroy their minds, so they only fainted. Noah carried Lilith and flew forward. After that, you can do some research and see if there is a way to restore them. Hearing this, Asashel finally reacted. He looked at Noah with gratitude, and then flew directly to the city below. If Asashel left just like that, the vampires in the city would definitely skin the unconscious evil dragons and pull out their tendons without knowing. So, Asashel chose to stay. As for the Camilla faction, naturally, it was left to Noah. With that spell, numbers were meaningless to Noah. On the other side, Noah flew in the direction of the Camilla faction as fast as he could. After a few minutes of flying at full speed, he finally arrived above the Camilla faction. This place had also turned into a sea of fire. The roads, buildings, and environment were all mercilessly destroyed. Not even a trace of it was left. Under the burning of the flames, it gradually turned into ruins. One evil dragon after another soared through the air. Some were destroying the city. Some were chasing the residents. Some were fighting. This part of the world had completely turned into an incomparably tragic battlefield. Seeing this scene, Noah was just about to go forward when he suddenly saw a young girl sitting on the street surrounded by flames. How could this be? Elmine Shelton no longer had the arrogance from before. It was as if she had lost her soul. She looked at her hometown with eyes full of confusion and despair. How could this be? The noble girl who was proud of her bloodline and repeatedly claimed that there were no vampires who denied their way of life in the Camilla faction was now defeated by the cruel reality. What should I do? Elmine Shelton looked at the scene in front of her in despair. What should I do? A voice answered her. What you should do is to hurry and save your hometown, not sit there and watch. Elmine Shelton trembled and quickly raised her head to look at the source of the voice. There, Noah had already turned into a stream of light and rushed forward. Chapter 1926. The fire that spread throughout the vampire's territory lasted until late into the night. It wasn't until the night fell that the flames gradually dimmed and disappeared. Along with the fire, the residences of the two major vampires, Sypesh and Camilla, also disappeared. Looking at the streets and the city that had been completely turned into ruins as if it had been attacked by artillery fire, and the charred remains of buildings everywhere, the Jamanli's kin fell into silence. How pitiful. Asashel looked around and sighed. This way, the vampires will have to live a hard life until everything is restored to its original state. After all, vampires were residents of the dark, and most of them were nocturnal creatures that could not be directly exposed to sunlight. Now that their residences had been turned into ruins, if they did not find a place to hide from the sun and settle down, the vampires would basically be doomed even if the evil dragons did not attack them. Moreover, the vampires had not been in contact with the outside world all this while, and had been hiding in their own residences and being complacent. Now that their residences had been destroyed, and because they had no contact with the outside world, the situation they faced was more difficult than imagined. If we lack resources for reconstruction, I can go back and talk to my father, Lyeth said. Maybe he can help. No need, I will ask for help from the major factions. Asashel scratched his head. Let the major factions bleed a little and provide some resources so that the reconstruction work can go smoothly. Lyeth nodded and did not say anything else. In fact, Noah was also present. Seeing that Asashel and Lyeth had decided on the next course of action in a few words, Noah shrugged and spoke to Asashel. Looks like we should put the peace talks aside for the time being. Yeah, Asashel said helplessly. King Sypesh was seriously injured because of the coup and is still in a coma. However, Queen Camilla is probably in a terrible fix because of the evil dragon's attack, and has no time to participate in our peace talks with Sypesh. That's a blessing in disguise, isn't it? What about the vampires that were transformed into evil dragons? Noah asked. Has everything been arranged? I've already ordered my subordinates to capture all of those evil dragons. All that's left is to research them. Arthashel's eyes were filled with the excitement and happiness of a stubborn scientist. A creature transformed from the power of the god's destruction tool. If I study it properly, it might be able to improve my artificial god's artifact. Hearing this, Noah's body trembled, and he silently mourned for those fellows in his heart. Hopefully, they would not be dissected for research. However, even if they were dissected for research, those guys only had themselves to blame. Who asked those fellows to be in cahoots with the mass of calamity? In the end, they were used and abandoned, turning into that ghastly appearance. He could only pray for the best. At this time, a young noble girl with 2 attendants slowly walked towards them. Everyone's gazes immediately turned to look at the newcomer. The newcomer was Elmine Shelton. At this moment, the previously domineering and even somewhat condescending vampire girl no longer had her previous arrogance. She was like an injured little animal that had just recovered, but was still a little weak. She came in front of everyone, lifted her skirt, and bowed. I, on behalf of Queen Camilla, would like to express my gratitude to everyone for their help today. Looking at Elmine Shelton's somewhat tired and weak expression, the group of Jamanli's followers looked at each other, then turned their gazes to Noah and Arthashel. Noah did not say anything, and only shrugged, leaving the right to speak to Arthashel. In response, Arthashel could only bitterly smile and take a step forward. After this, I will request the major forces that we have reached an agreement with to help the vampires rebuild their territories. If there's anything you need help with, don't hesitate to ask. Hearing this, Elmine Shelton did not show any signs of gratitude. Instead, she lowered her head and remained silent. The atmosphere suddenly became a little strange. Everyone suddenly looked at each other, not understanding what was going on. Just as Arthashel frowned and was about to speak again, Elmaine Shelton suddenly asked. Our negotiations with you have already broken down. Even if you're not enemies, you're definitely not friends. If that's the case, why would you want to help us? Not only did you save us, but you also intend to help us rebuild? Arthashel and the Jamonli's followers were all stunned. On the other hand, Elmaine Sheridan shifted his gaze to Noah and said in an extremely complicated tone. Lord Noah, you're very powerful. We've all seen it. Even the evil dragon army that the entire vampire race is helpless against is as fragile as a piece of paper in your hands. If you're so powerful, if you really want to force us to reach an agreement, you have plenty of means to achieve your goal. Why didn't you do that, but instead went through the trouble of coming to the vampire kingdom and going through so much trouble to negotiate with the vampires? From Elmaine Shelton's tone, Noah not only heard the complicated emotions, but also a kind of confusion. Presumably, the destruction of her home and the betrayal of her companions should have brought a lot of blows to this prideful vampire girl, right? As a result, Elmaine Shelton no longer had the arrogance and haughtiness from before. Instead, he noticed some details and problems that he hadn't noticed before. That was Noah's approach and attitude. That was why Elmaine Shelton asked this question. Noah raised his eyes and met Elmaine Sherstein's gaze. After a long while, he faintly said, Don't worry about it. Because what we're after is peace. Hearing Zhang Tai's words, Elmaine Shelton's eyes rippled as he became completely speechless. That's right. Because what Noah was after was peace. Since he was after peace, there was no reason to force it. Even before, in front of the major mythical forces, Noah only chose to show his power. Whether or not to conclude a peace treaty was up to the mythical forces themselves to decide, and there was no coercion. Otherwise, if Noah really wanted to use forceful means to force the major forces to conclude a peace treaty, with the power of another cosmology, it was simply something that could be done easily. However, was such a forced peace really peace? That was just moving the battle on the surface to the dark. Not only was there no benefit, but there were only disadvantages, right? Noah would not do that kind of superficial work and lose the big picture for the small. And Noah's words also made Athathiel and the people of Jimenez's family look at each other and smile. Just like what teacher Noah said, what we're after is peace, not war, Liath said softly. Even if the negotiations break down, we won't leave your country in the lurch. Of course, what we hope to see is world peace, not just the safety of a single race. World peace cannot be achieved without a single person. Asashel looked at Elmaine Shelton. So, we also hope that the vampires can become our partners and work with us to maintain this peace. Elmaine Shelton's gaze swept over everyone. Seeing that there wasn't a trace of hypocrisy on their faces, he fell into silence once again. However, the perplexed expression on Elmaine Shelton's face disappeared little by little. I truly feel everyone's sincerity. For the first time, Elmaine Shelton showed a smile from the bottom of his heart. I will mention the peace treaty to Queen Camilla again and let her reconsider. Athathiel and the people of Jimenez's family suddenly laughed, extremely happy. The corners of Noah's mouth could not help but curl up slightly, and his heart was suddenly enlightened. I hope that one day I can sit at the negotiating table with all of you again and have a detailed discussion. Elmaine Shelton bowed. I also hope that one day I can usher in real-world peace with all of you. Everyone nodded with a smile. In the night sky, stars began to appear one after another. They shone brightly, bringing light and hope to the boundless darkness. Chapter 1927. Due to the coup d'état between the government and anti-government factions, the Seeps royal city, where the Seeps king lived, had become dilapidated and riddled with holes. There were traces of battle everywhere. Noah walked through the corridors that he had passed during the day, and he could see vampires bustling around him. The big commotion during the day had made the residents of the entire vampiric kingdom recognize Noah, the god slayer. Therefore, along the way, every vampire would lower their heads and bow to Noah. Their expressions were very respectful, and even a little fearful. The terrifying power that Noah displayed made the vampires hold a contradictory attitude of respect and fear for Noah. In this regard, Noah did not care much and walked forward under the salutes and gazes of the vampires. In his hand, he was holding a petite girl in a dark dress. Of course, it was Lilith. This little girl, who was more ignorant and innocent than Orpheus, now seemed to be completely captivated by Noah. One hand was tightly holding Noah, and no matter where Noah went, she followed him. The other hand was holding a lollipop, which she licked expressionlessly. That scene was simply like a little girl who had been abducted and bribed. Noah did not have this self-awareness at all. He took Lilith's hand with a matter-of-fact expression and came in front of a door. He reached out and knocked on the door. The next second, a Sashal's voice sounded from inside. "Come in." Hearing this, Noah pushed the door open and walked into the room. It was a very spacious and luxurious room. The floor was covered with soft carpets. Beautiful curtains hung on the four walls. There was a very gorgeous bed in the corner. At first glance, it looked like the boudoir of a princess, and it was very eye-catching. The only flaw was that there were no windows here. Except for a door that was connected to the outside, it was completely closed. However, this was also a characteristic of vampires, and there was nothing strange in the vampiric kingdom. At this moment, there were two people in the room. One was a Sashal, who was sitting on the edge of the bed, examining something. The other was a young girl. It was a young girl with waist-length hair that was not so much a resplendent golden color as it was a rather peculiar color. The girl seemed to be around 20 years old. Her facial features were quite regular, just like Elmaine Shelton. She looked like a doll with an indescribable beauty. The difference was that the girl's skin wasn't unhealthy pale, but was as smooth and soft as a pearl, just like a human's. However, this beautiful girl was lying on the bed with her eyes closed as if she had fallen into eternal sleep. Her expression was extremely peaceful. Looking at the beautiful girl lying on the bed, Noah whispered, "Is this Valerie Tsepesh?" Valerie Tsepesh. The new king that Tsepesh advocated during the coup d'état, and also the holder of the godly Sephiroth's cup. She was a hybrid between a human and a vampire. In other words, it was not an exaggeration to say that she was the culprit who colluded with the group of disasters and stirred up the entire vampire world. At least, that was what Noah had always thought. However, not long ago, Noah found out that this girl was just a puppet. The real culprit who colluded with the group of disasters and attempted a coup d'état, severely injuring the king of Opesh and causing him to fall into a coma, and indirectly or directly stirring up the entire vampire world, was actually the Holy Grail holders' family of the same blood and origin. In the world of vampires, half-breeds had no status. Letting a mixed blood become a king was something that couldn't be allowed in the first place. Although Valerie inherited the bloodline of Tsepesh, she was a hybrid herself. It was impossible for a vampire to support her and let her become the new Tsepesh king. What's more, Tsepesh was originally a patriarchal clan. It was too ridiculous to let a woman become a king. Therefore, the real cause of the coup d'état was Valerie's relative of the same bloodline. After Valerie awakened the godly tool in her body, he deceived Valerie with flowery words and used the power of the Holy Grail to rope in a vampire clan that wanted to become a flawless creature. He secretly accumulated strength and cooperated with the group of disasters. From then on, Valerie's relative of the same bloodline was destined to be a tragedy. Because he was just a tragic figure that was used by Lezavim. During the day, when Athasiel and Jimenez's subordinates barged in and came to Valerie, the Holy Grail in Valerie's body had already been taken away. Her relative of the same bloodline was torn in half by the evil dragon and died without a burial place. And Valerie started to fall into a state of suspended animation at that time. That's right. Suspended animation. Originally, if the godly tool in the body was taken away, the original owner of the godly tool should have died directly. However, Valerie did not die directly. She only fell into a state of suspended animation, or it was not an exaggeration to say that she was in a state of deep sleep. What's going on? Noah looked at Athasiel. Why did Valerie Tsepesh not die directly after the godly tool was taken away? The reason is actually very simple. Athasiel seemed to be admiring and exclaiming at the same time. The Holy Grail that Lezavim took away is only a part of the godly tool in Valerie Tsepesh's body. It's not the whole thing. A part of the godly tool? Noah was stunned. You're saying that the Holy Grail in Lezavim's hands is only a part of the Tsihiratha's cup? That's impossible, right? Undoubtedly, the Holy Grail that Noah saw in Lezavim's hands was complete. Moreover, the power was very complete. Even the evil dragons were completely resurrected. Lezavim even used the power of the Holy Grail twice to heal his injuries. Noah saw it clearly. In the end, that power was only a part of the Holy Grail? How was that possible? I thought it was impossible at first, but after carefully examining Valerie Tsepesh's body, I confirmed it. Athasiel met Noah's gaze and said word by word. There is not only one Holy Grail in Valerie Tsepesh's body, but there are a total of 3. They are the godly tools that have become subspecies since they were awakened. Subspecies? Noah completely understood. Valerie Tsepesh's Holy Grail had mutated. It became a subspecies. It was not a subspecies of the Forbidden Hand, but a subspecies of the artifact itself. Just like how a divine artifact might have a subspecies of Forbidden Hand that was completely different from the original Forbidden Hand, some divine artifacts might also mutate and become a divine artifact that was poles apart from the original artifact. That was the subspecies of the artifact itself. However, the probability of the latter subspecies appearing was much lower than the former subspecies. So far, there had not been more than 10 cases of subspecies appearing. As for the godly tool subspecies, it was almost unprecedented. The probability of its appearance was frighteningly low. In the end, there was only one here. I don't know if the person in charge knows about this. Only one of the 3 Holy Grails in Valerie Tsepesh's body was taken away. The remaining 2 still exist in her body, so the holder of the Holy Grail didn't die directly. Athasiel glanced in Valerie's direction. However, even if only a part of the artifact is taken out, it will greatly affect the holder. If the Holy Grail that was taken away is not found and reimplanted in her body, the little girl will probably never wake up. Hearing Athasiel's words, Noah fell into silence. Find the Holy Grail that was taken away? That was easier said than done. I've heard. Athasiel's expression became serious, and there was even a faint trace of resentment. The person currently leading the disaster squad is that bastard Lyran, right? That's right. Noah nodded. It's that surpasser who is as famous as Sazax and Achuka. However, this statement is too exaggerated. Wasn't it? Compared to Sazax and Achuka, Lezavim's strength was really far inferior. In this regard, Athasiel said this. Surpasser refers to surpassing in terms of race, not power. Although that bastard Lyran is much weaker than Sazax and Achuka, he also has abnormal abilities. You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.